Chapter 1066. From Donglan to the south of the Central Cloud Continent, if one sat on a normal cloud ship, it would take at least 12 days. Zhongsho drove the Royal Demon God shuttle, but it only took him a day. When he arrived, it was when the navy led by Rulin entered the cloud world. 9 Tai God lightning ships, 6 bright broken star ships, and 40 large-sized spaceships. They forcefully broke through the space barrier and floated in the cloud ocean. Each giant ship gave off a majestic aura. Along with the 4 9-tooth warships and 57-tooth warships that Deqian had built in the cloud world, they could totally suppress the Taishang fleet. With Rulin's ability to lead the navy, she could even crush them. However, above the cloud ocean, Zhongsho used his world-burning blood eyes to look out and noticed that the Taishang army had far more than just 22 9-tooth warships. Apart from that, there were 9 ships covered in celestial energy and spiritual light, as well as 8 7-kill spirit slaughtering ships of the demon path. These were all celestial treasures, and their main use was for flying. However, they could also be used as warships. Even if they couldn't compare to Earth-grade warships like the Tai God lightning ships, the difference wouldn't be too big. Especially the 7-kill spirit slaughtering ships. The more they killed, the thicker the spirit slaughtering god light around them. The more intelligent a living being was, the more they would be restricted by the god light. As he had expected, the Confucian and demon factions both had strong foundations. In terms of the navy, the Taishang still had the absolute advantage. However, Rulin was really confident about this battle. Brother Fong Xin, in just 3 days, I'll be able to heavily injure the enemy. This waterway will be fine. Based on what Rulin said, these 3 days were to adjust the condition of the navy to allow the soldiers to adapt to the cloud world environment. For this battle, the Taishang has mobilized tens of millions of troops to go deep into the south. The daily consumption is hard to count, and they can't afford to drag it out any longer than Deqian. So, we just need a sufficient number of ships. As long as they had enough grain and resources, the Taishang's navy had to stop them and fight with Rulin. Zhongsho smiled. Looking at what Rulin meant, she was prepared to settle the situation in one battle. He probably saw through the current situation of Great Gone and knew that one of the keys to this battle was the outcome of the naval battle. However, based on his original intentions, he was prepared to let Rulin's navy restrict the enemy. As long as they didn't lose at Qian's, they would have a certain chance of victory. If we can defeat Great Shang's navy first, Big Sister Kong Yao will definitely have a much easier time. In front of Zhongsho, Rulin was really confident and even arrogant. Naturally, she knew the responsibility of fighting a decisive battle with the Taishang's navy. If Deqian won, then with the smooth sailing route and endless resources, it would only make the Taishang more anxious to have a decisive battle on land. Once Kong Yao took the initiative, with his top commander of the cloud world, she would definitely reduce the Deqian's military strength advantage to the extreme. However, once they lost, it would be the most dangerous situation for the Deqian, which was why Rulin made such a solemn vow to calm down Zhongsho. She couldn't help but think back to the past. If it wasn't for her brother bringing her out from the abyss under the cloud ocean, she might still be struggling in hell. She had no one to rely on and no family. Although she commanded warships in the past, she had commanded many battles. However, most of them were after Zhongsho had built up enough advantages. Even if the navy won, it was just icing on the cake. Only in this battle could she truly use her strength to turn the tides and help Zhongsho. Even if she died here, she would cause the Taishang's navy to suffer heavy losses here. She would lay the foundation for the Deqian's victory. Zhongsho roughly knew what this bro was thinking. After laughing bitterly, he could only helplessly pat Rulin's head. Anyways, you just have to make your own decisions. However, there's no need to force it, and there's no need to be anxious. Although he wasn't a true, unparalleled general, in the future, his ability to lead troops was tempered. He felt that he wasn't weaker than anyone when it came to fighting on land. Moreover, the Deqian army was filled with famous generals. Kong Yao, Zhong Yuan, Ren Tianxing, and also Hu Zhongyuan, who was slowly growing up and had been through hundreds of battles. Chai Zhou, He Li, and the others. This was why he really didn't want Rulan's weak shoulders to bear too much pressure. However, looking at Rulan's situation, she had made up her mind. The only thing he could do was to ask Gu Laikong, who was more cautious, to take care of her before she left. He continued to drive the royal demon god shuttle into the south. The moment he entered the land, he could feel the solemn atmosphere. Although there were numerous swamps and forests in this region, the land was also really fertile. The grain yield of the Seimu of land was probably twice that of Donglin Cloud Continent. Along the way, Zhongsho saw dozens of tribes that Zhongsho saw were all strategic places, and they were all defending themselves. In the wilderness forests, there are often no people. Many fields and pastures were abandoned, obviously to avoid being affected by this battle. Zhongsho didn't care. These tribes fought each other all year round, and they were probably used to war. It saved the Deqian from spending so much effort to persuade these tribes to hide and clear out the wilderness. The 2 million troops that Kong Yao led were at the south of Honglian mountain range. They were split into several groups and blocked the few exits of Honglian mountain range. The mountain range was rugged and hard to pass through. Only a small number of troops were needed to defend the pass. This would cause the enemy to be unable to advance or retreat. Kong Yao was well versed in the art of war. How could she give up on such a good terrain? When Zhongsho's royal demon god shuttle landed in the camp, the hundreds of thousands of troops cheered out. All the generals were pumped up. This was the benefit of personally leading the troops. Zhongsho personally coming to the front of the formation was an immeasurable boost to morale. Zhong Yuan and Ren Tianxing rushed over from hundreds of miles away to help Zhongsho. Only Kong Yao was cold towards Zhongsho's arrival. I don't have enough troops, and it is tough for me to hold on at those few passes. To be able to hold on till now is because the Taishang isn't serious at all. They are prepared to wait for our army to give up on these few passes. To make Kong Yao give up on the terrain advantage, there was only one possibility, which was the Navy losing. At that time, apart from swiftly fighting to the death, they could only try their best to escape. After saying this, Kong Yao looked at Zhongsho with a suspicious gaze. "Ruler, you really came alone?" Zhongsho nodded his head slightly. He was indeed alone and rushed over alone. He didn't even bring his own honor guard here. Uncle Chiu has already recruited 4 million grade 3 cultivators. However, it will take a period of time for them to be of use. At this time, it wasn't that the Deqian didn't have money, but they didn't have many troops to use. To be continued. Chapter 1067. When the snipe and the clam fight, he might not be able to be the fisherman. However, if Shuriwe is really watching from the side, then our Deqian will have a 10% chance of winning. After Kong Yao said this, she noticed that Zhongsho was looking at her in a daze. She was first a little shy, but then she stared back viciously. "What are you looking at? What's there to look at?" Zhongsho laughed. What he loved the most was when Kong Yao was in charge of the army and led the troops on the battlefield. She was really valiant and beautiful. Little Yao, if you think that he will plot against Yin Yu and drag down the Taishang, then you are wrong. Seeing Kong Yao's eyes filled with doubt, Zhongsho explained, "You might not believe it, but this person is really magnanimous. Although he has a huge foundation in the outer region, as long as the Taishang doesn't let him down, then he won't betray the Taishang. This time, even if he returned from the outer region and is watching from the side, he is most probably worried that the Taishang Emperor will lose to me and not trying to take advantage of the situation." Kong Yao's face was filled with shock. Based on what she knew, Shuriwe already had dozens of worlds in the outer region, and his achievements were no weaker than Zhongsho's. With such strength, he was actually willing to be a subject of the Taishang. Zhongsho was slightly distracted as he looked outside the tent. Shuriwe was pretty much perfect his entire life. Even as an enemy, he was filled with respect for him. The reason why he started to attack was because the Taishang failed him first, and he had lost all hope in the Taishang. Even in the history books of the future, no one said anything about him. Some people said that he was a hypocrite, but he was magnanimous his entire life. Even if he was a hypocrite, it was rare. There is actually such a person? Kong Yao muttered, and then she didn't care anymore. No matter whether or not Shuriwei rushed back to the cloud world, or what his intentions were, it wouldn't affect the battle situation at all. She reached out her hand and pointed at the map. Husband, I am prepared to break the enemy here. What do you think? God falling plains? Zhong Shou's brows rose up. A look of shock appeared on his face. His face changed, ashen white like paper. God falling plains? I have never heard of it. What happened to you? Kong Yao jumped in fright and was equally astonished. The place she was pointing at should be a nameless place. Where did Zhong Shou hear the name God falling plains from? She was to find a fight to win a win? It's okay. This place, of course. Zhong Shou's expression instantly returned to normal as he smiled and nodded. How was it too? It should be said that he was vicious. However, this place was where Kong Yao died in her last life. At that time, although the Taishang was in chaos, Kong Yao was able to lead the army and win many victories. South Wuxing Pass, West Tong Pass. Relying on these two passes, she defeated many experts and wiped out the Guangdong lords. She also blocked off the Shi family army in the southwest. In the end, helplessly, the Shi family could only try to go around the south. Hence, there was this God Falling Plains battle. The name God Falling Plains came from this place, where the unparalleled army God fell. Zhong Shou couldn't help but raise his head and look into the sky. Maybe in this world, there really was cause and effect. He also understood that this battle was probably where Kong Yao would go against the heavens and change her fate. As for this God Falling Plains, it is nothing much. I just casually gave it a name. Why is it so random? Kong Yao scoffed lightly, but for some reason, she felt her entire body become lighter, as if she had shaken off some kind of restriction. Zhong Shou smiled and didn't say anything. Just at that moment, a purple gold talisman flew into the tent. It was a message talisman for reporting military intelligence, but it didn't use any secret language. It was obvious that it wasn't afraid of being intercepted by experts. Zhong Shou grabbed it in his hand. A moment later, the smile on his face grew wider. Facing Kong Yao's questioning gaze, Zhong Shou tried his best to be calm. It is Ruolin. She has already won. That Taishang Navy commander wasn't a mediocre person. He wanted to sneak attack the naval port that the Daqian Navy was defending when Shi Ruolin wasn't stable and was exhausted. However, he didn't expect to be ambushed by Shi Ruolin, losing a full 7 9-tooth warships, 2 spirit-slaughtering warships, and 23 7-tooth warships. However, as she was indeed exhausted, she was unable to continue to chase and expand her gains. This battle was said to be extremely tragic. In the end, Shi Ruolin relied on her ingenious use of the 7-kill spirit-slaughtering warships to cause numerous Taishang soldiers to die on the battlefield. Only then was she able to clinch victory. Their losses were not small either. However, after this battle, the Taishang's thoughts of cutting off the sea route would become a dream. Kong Yao was also pumped up. Before the battle, this was the best news. At the same time, north of the Honglian mountain range, a carriage pulled by 72 Grade 7 dragon horses was slowly heading south under the protection of 100,000 iron-armored elite cavalry. Although it was called a carriage, it was more like a small palace. It was 1,000 feet wide and was split into tens of compartments. There were maids and eunuchs walking within. This carriage weighed over 1 million stones and had a floating formation. The 72 dragon horses were extremely strong. This was why its flying speed was even faster than those cavalry. However, the decorations within were really simple, without any luxurious items to show how simple the owner was. At this moment, at the back of the carriage, within the spacious imperial reading room, Inu viciously threw out his white jade paperweight. It smashed into pieces. The eunuchs within the reading room were all terrified and didn't dare to make sound. Zhong Xuan stood beside the window, looking at the stars in deep thought. Just now, he noticed that the army-breaking light shaking star in the sky flashed for a moment. Unfortunately, the time was too short, and he wasn't able to deduce it. The stars were messed up, and he couldn't see anything. He was unable to confirm whether or not the enemy was trying to be mysterious or whether or not the stars were changing. Shaking light, shaking star? In this world, only Kong Yao was related to the army-breaking light, shaking star. Could it be that in this battle, this peerless commander who had shaken the world would be able to turn the tide and reverse the situation? All of a sudden, he was unable to confirm it. Just as he was about to analyze it, he heard the sound of a jade piece breaking behind him. When he turned around, he saw that Inyu's anger hadn't dissipated and his eyes were red. "Your Majesty, is it because of the defeat of the Navy?" Zhongshuan didn't care. "I said long ago that the strength of the Deqian Navy is no weaker than our Taishang. Although we didn't win this battle, we saved a lot of energy, so there's no need to worry." Inyu shook his head. The battle had just started and they had already suffered a defeat. How unlucky. However, with Inyu's shrewdness, he wouldn't be so furious because of such a small loss. "It's Jin Buhui." Inyu laughed coldly, his voice filled with endless cold intent. "This kid actually wrote a letter asking our Taishang to stop the war. He said that Zhongshuo is a wise ruler, and our Taishang will definitely return in defeat." Chapter 1068. This kid actually wrote a letter for us Taishang to stop the war. He said that Zhongshuo is a wise ruler, and that our Taishang will definitely lose. Jin Buhui? The one who once submitted 3 memorials to the imperial censorate to accuse the local noble families of running amok, and proposed to reform the imperial examination method and the policy of conferring titles? Zhongshuan's brow rose up, and he found it really weird. This Jin Buhui's memorials were always a little out of place. No, he should be the former imperial censor. Inyu originally wanted to change things. However, during these few years, the aristocratic families were tempted. Due to the fight for stone mines, many conflicts arose. Helplessly, Inyu could only leave Jin Buhui idle and demote him to a grade 7 county magistrate at the border. This was also because Inyu wanted to protect him. Those 3 memorials had totally offended the aristocratic families of the Taishang. He really didn't expect that this person wasn't willing to hide his strength and bide his time at the border. This time he actually pointed his spear at Emperor Yuanshen. Did this person really think that just one Haoshuan sect could protect him? Silently, after bowing, Zhongshuan took the memorials from Inyu's table. After looking at it for a moment, he was speechless. Jin Buhui said in the memorials that the country couldn't send troops out of anger and couldn't engage in unjust wars. Attacking the Deqian because of the anger of the late Saint Juzi was one of the reasons why it wasn't appropriate. The Deqian didn't do anything wrong, and sending troops to attack them was the second reason why it wasn't appropriate. Even when he looked at all of this, he found it preposterous and amusing. However, there were some contents at the back that he could take a look at. He said that the Deqian ruler Zhongshuo was a talent that was hard to see in 10 million years. Not only was his martial path high, he was invincible in the cloud world. He was also top in both military and political paths and was tough to defeat on the battlefield. At this moment, the Deqian country was at its peak and their ocean transportation was developed. The south was covered in water and there were many swamps. Deqian's army had easy resupply and they had the geographical advantage. If they drag it out in the south and did not fight, it would be enough to crush the 10 million Taishang troops. Even if the Taishang really forced Zhongshuo to fight, it would be a trap. In short, there was only one meaning in the text, and that was that once the Taishang entered Nanjiang, they would lose for sure. What the Taishang needed to do now was to stabilize the country and fix its internal affairs so as not to give Deqian an excuse to invade. They needed to expand their territory as much as possible, instead of rashly making an enemy out of Deqian. Along with the 52 states of Middle Earth working together, their expansion speed would definitely exceed that of the Deqian Celestial Dynasty. They would also be able to shift the internal conflicts. He could be considered to be quite knowledgeable, but he had taken things for granted. It was because the Deqian country was at its peak that they had to destroy their foundations in the cloud world. Now was the perfect time. Zhongshuan shook his head slightly and placed the document down. It really is weird to actually scold Zhu Zi for flipping the truth, holding the ruler hostage, and interfering with the country. How bold! How is your majesty planning to deal with him? Anyone who messes with our army's morale will be killed. Yinyu's rage hadn't subsided, his eyes filled with killing intent. Before we attack Nanjiang, it is not bad to use this person as a sacrifice. If one said that Zhongsho was a wise ruler, then in Jin Buhui's eyes, Yinyu was definitely a muddle-headed ruler. If one said that Zhu Zi held the ruler hostage, then where did that place him in the ruler's heart? He originally thought that he was a useful subject, which was why he doted on him. Now it seemed like he was a cold-blooded person. With just one look, Zhongshuan knew that Yinyu wanted to toss out Jin Buhui to rope in those aristocratic families and vassal towns. If Jin Buhui died, the relationship between the imperial court and the aristocratic families and vassal towns would be much better. However, following which he thought back to a few years ago, the words that Zhongsho said to him when he left the Cloud World. If anything happened to Jin Buhui, he would go all out to take revenge. He was really decisive and didn't leave any room for negotiation. At that time, it was when Zhongsho wiped out 37 Taoist sects alone, and his reputation was at its peak. That's not right. This person is Zhongsho's good friend. Even if we want to deal with him, it is best to wait until the Battle of Nanjiang ends. At that time, he would be speechless. Zhongsho's good friend? Then he deserves to die. The killing intent in Yinyu's eyes grew stronger. It was this Zhongsho who sent his 300,000 Dao soldiers to their deaths outside of the common people's dome. It caused his Deqian to lose the ability to wipe out the aristocratic families of the various vassal towns. His rage was hard to suppress, but he temporarily suppressed it. Forget it. Send someone to lock him up and throw him into the jail. After this battle, we will deal with him. With a cold snort, Yinyu took out the other memorial. A moment later, he frowned and his expression slowly turned solemn. Zhongshuan's face was filled with confusion. Thinking to himself, who was this? What was the content of the document that His Majesty paid so much attention to? Before he opened his mouth to ask, Yinyu said solemnly, "It is Shuriyue." He also wrote that Nanjiang has a dense water net and the Qian Navy is at its peak. Our Navy can't win and can't cut off the water net like in the river. The Qian only has 3 million troops, but they can go up against 10 million. Sooner or later, they will be dragged down in Nanjiang. We also can't force them into a decisive battle before they are forced into a corner. Kong Yao is a top commander in the world, and Zhongsho's commanding ability is top. He definitely won't fight our Taishang army when he isn't confident. He needs to be really careful. Zhongshuan was speechless. He knew about Shuriyue's foundations and that he was a rising star in the central continent. He had heard about the news of the Shur family opening up the outer region and achieving a lot. Their ability to use troops was no weaker than any famous generals. This person's view was actually the same as Jin Buhui's. What a surprise. Shur family. Yinyu unknowingly held the brush tightly. Even when a few cracks formed, he didn't feel anything. A moment later, he sighed. He casually tossed the document to the side. Shuriyue wasn't Jin Buhui and couldn't be easily controlled and dealt with. In the document, he only reminded the imperial court to be careful and didn't say that he was wrong, which was why he didn't say anything. Zhongshuan's brow rose up. He could see that Yinyu was worried about the Shur family. If in the past, the 5 aristocratic families led by the Yang family were a needle in Yinyu's heart, a thorn in his flesh, then, at this moment, the Shur family was what Yuanshan Emperor feared the most. The third document made Yinyu feel better. It was the south-conquering General Feiyin who was leading the 3 million troops. He said that within 10 days, they would be able to break through Jade Canyon. In other words, in just 10 days, his imperial carriage will be able to pass through Honglian mountain range. There were only 5 people in the Taishang who held the Great General Seal. All of them had gone through thousands of battles and accumulated merits. Their war records were outstanding, and their ability to use troops was top-notch. This Feiyin was one of them. Speaking of which, this Feiyin is the only one out of the 5 who insists that Kong Yao is useless. Chapter 1069. Mediocre. Inyu's lips curled up coldly, not bothering to comment. Kong Yao's matter had always been a thorn in his flesh that he couldn't touch. Since Kong Yao rose up and showed her unparalleled commanding talents, she led the army to attack the Cloud World and won every battle. There were rumors in the Central Cloud Continent that said that Inyu was blind and didn't know how to judge people. He gave a commander talent to Gantian Mountain for nothing. Each victory that Kong Yao had was like a slap to his face. No matter how good his temper was, after these few years, he had accumulated a lot of frustration. I have heard of it. General Fei said that her achievements in Qian were all due to luck, and that she would show her true colors in front of him. Not to mention right or wrong, just her fighting spirit is praiseworthy. Naturally, he knew that Kong Yao did have some commanding talents. A few years ago, when Fein led the army in the north, his evaluation of Kong Yao was really low. Not only was he wrong, but it also directly affected his judgment. Whether or not those words were because Fein wasn't willing to admit that he was wrong, or if he really thought so, it was tough to say. However, if he could destroy the undefeatable legend of Kong Yao's own show, he would be happy. He would be able to comfort himself. He would also be able to put an end to those rumors. Standing up, Inyu walked to the side of the window and looked out of the carriage. Coincidentally, they could see a huge cavalry force approaching from behind. They were riding Xian Flame golden Qilin beasts, holding 3-foot flame spears, purple gold armor, their eyes shining brightly. Not only were their auras strong and vast, but they were also noble and beautiful. At a rough glance, there were a total of 65,000 people marching in the wilderness, as if there was no end to their numbers. Inyu's eyes lit up, his heroic spirit rising. The reason why he dared to personally lead the troops to attack the south was because of this. It seems like the Taoist faction is really going all out this time. Although Zhongshuan was also a Taoist, he didn't consider himself a member of the Taoist sect. At this moment, he was in awe of the Xian Grey Dao soldiers in the Cloud World. In terms of growth and stamina, the common people's Xian Dragon warriors were the leaders. In terms of combat strength, the Kinzo sect's Weiyang sword cavalry was second to none. However, in terms of perfection, offense, and defense, the purple Qilin flame spear cavalry was second to none. During the last Dowling vast habitat battle, the purple Qilin flame spear cavalry lost. It wasn't because they weren't able to use their combat strength. This time the Taoist faction sent out all the purple Qilin flame spear cavalry. It looks like the Qian is in trouble this time. It wasn't just the purple Qilin flame spear cavalry. There were also 50,000 scattered profound ranked Dao soldiers. This included the 20,000 purple cloud sword cavalry of Tailing sect. 120,000 profound rank knights followed behind the dragon carriage in a majestic manner. Shortly after, another 50,000 cavalry in black armor joined in. They were the Xian Grey Dao soldiers of the Sky Demon Vast Habitat, the Sky Demon War Cavalry. Last time the Demon Sect still held back. This time they're going all out. Zhongshuan squinted and a weird glow flashed in his eyes. The foundations of the Demon Sect aren't in the Central Continent and are spread out in the other 4 continents and 12 islands. These 50,000 Heavenly Demon War Cavalry should be his limit. Inyu smiled. If the Demon Sect was gathered in the Central Continent, it would be a huge problem instead. Although this battle wasn't going to happen when they attacked Donglin, Yunnan, and Foam Cloud Continent, they could make use of their strength. During the Common People's Vast Habitat battle, the 3 factions worked together, but they returned in failure. Instead, they lost 3 End Realm experts. The 3 demonic Confucian sects wanted to turn the tables in this battle and regain their face. Then, naturally, they had to go all out in this battle. The strength of the Demon Sect can't compare to the Taoist faction. At this moment, Inyu and Zhongshuan weren't the only ones who were looking at these 2 invincible cavalry armies. The cloud-crossing carriages that were speeding along opened their windows one after another. The escorting knights also turned their heads and looked over with shock in their eyes. This is the purple Chilean flame spear cavalry that is said to be the strongest army in the world. What an overbearing aura! That purple cloud sword cavalry and heaven demon war cavalry aren't weak either. With such a strong army, our Taishang will definitely win. As they say, those who are righteous get more help while those who are unrighteous get less. It is because our Taishang follows the people that we are able to make everyone listen to us. That the Qian army Zhong Shou went against the flow and caused his country to be wiped out. Unfortunately, the people of Donglin and Nanjiang will have to face this calamity. Burning books and burying Confucians again? Preposterous. He is just a barbarian king and actually dares to be so arrogant. The saint ruler is personally leading 10 million troops and 1 million cavalry. He will definitely wipe out the Qian. This person dares to hurt our Saint Dong. If we capture him, I will definitely write to His Majesty to kill him. We will use the most severe punishment in the world to deal with this Qian ruler. The officials who followed the emperor to the south were all discussing spiritedly. As for the iron-armored elite cavalry, their spirits were lifted and their morale was greatly boosted. Qian grade cavalry, all of them were Xuanwu ancestors who were grade 6 martial path experts. Close to 170,000 earth grade peak experts. The energy pillar, after gathering together, charged into the clouds. Iron hooves galloped and thunder rumbled. Inu clenched his fists and then dimmed down. The Dao soldiers of the various sects were what he hated the most. However, today, they had become his support. If those 300,000 Dao soldiers were here, who knows how good it would be. He hated that Zhong Shou more and more. However, if he could get what he wanted this time, if he wanted to rebuild the Yuanshan Blood Chief cavalry, it wouldn't be a difficult matter. As for the Daqian Blood Cloud cavalry legacy, he was even more curious. They were all grade 5 cavalry, but when their vital energy was absorbed to the peak, they could go up against grade 6 cavalry by several times. If he could obtain it, shaking his head and breaking out into a laugh, Inu mocked himself for having too much hope. He looked at Zhongshuan. Grand Teacher, what do you think of my battle? Zhongshuan's expression turned solemn as he took a close look at Inu. Only when his eyes felt a burning pain did he say respectfully, I still can't judge whether it is good or bad. However, Your Majesty's body is surging with Emperor energy. It is obvious that our Taishang country fate is about to change. Change? A sign of great change? A bright glow flashed in Inyu's eyes. Before he met Zhongshuan, he remembered that an expert had judged in front of him. Taishang would definitely die in the 56th year after the spiritual wave. Even Zhongshuan didn't breathe a word about this. Therefore, for the past 100 years, he, Inyu, had always been cautious and conscientious. At this moment, Zhongshuan said that there was a huge change. Did he mean that the fate of the Shang dynasty had finally changed? Just as Zhongshuan was about to continue speaking, he suddenly felt the ground shake. He was slightly shocked as he looked over. His face turned ashen. It is the few Confucian faction Saint Realm experts working together to flatten the mountain, to expand the Jade Canyon. Inyu was startled before he came back to his senses. That Jade Canyon was one of the exits of the Honglian mountain range. The terrain was dangerous and could only send out 100,000 troops. A few Saint Realm experts flattened the mountain and expand the Jade Canyon. This caused the Qian army to lose all their geographical advantage. He couldn't help but laugh out loud in delight. It seems like I don't need 10 days. Chapter 1070. In front of Jade Canyon, Zhong Shou floated in the air and looked forwards with an ice-cold expression. The originally emerald green mountain valley had been completely flattened by a majestic force in an instant. The originally narrow mountain path became a flat path. The valley expanded, and the entrance that could only allow a few hundred people to pass could now allow 100,000 people to form up. At this moment, in the barracks of the Qian army, all the soldiers and generals were dumbfounded as they watched everything in front of them. The earth shook, but the Saint Stage powerhouses on the other side still displayed their powerful divine senses without the slightest scruple. Their might was incomparably domineering. He scoffed, and the god refined sword bust. It brought Zhongsho's body and charged into the sky. He was really familiar with it, and in just a moment, he connected with the 6 common people's sword artifacts that were hidden nearby. Countless runes condensed from spiritual light appeared in the void, circling around the 7 swords like a ribbon. The will of the heavens also pressed down. Pretty much all the grade 7 and above cultivators in the 2 camps were terrified, and they all knelt down. On the contrary, those below grade 7 couldn't touch the heaven tribulation and the will of the heavens and didn't sense anything. His spiritual sense locked onto the few mountain shifter cultivators in the distance. Then a vast sword light swept over. He showed no mercy and wiped out everything. Preposterous! There was a soft snort, and 4 giant hands suddenly emerged from the void and collided with the boundless sword projection. Instantly, the heaven and earth shook and sword energy spread all about. The sword light couldn't hold on and broke apart. As for the 4 large hands, they all collapsed. Zhu Zhongsho's brow rose up. Opposite him were the 3 god venerables of the Confucian faction, and also Zhu himself. At this moment, he could sense the end-realm spiritual sense intersecting in the outer region. Xiaoguan was using his own strength to suppress Qing Xian and Tai Wang, as well as the 3 god venerables of the Confucian faction and demon faction. Long Ying, Yuan Jing, and Lin Xuanchuang were dealing with Wushang Yuan demon. The latter was fighting 1 against 3, but he was still calm and composed, as if he still had some strength left. The few saint-level experts opposite him were still arrogant and unrestrained. Even if he was suppressed by the heaven path sword intent of the common people's 7 swords, he didn't fear it at all. Instead, he spread out his soul and tried his best to go up against Zhongsho. Fatuous ruler, why aren't you surrendering and accepting your own death? Flattening the Emerald Gorge is heaven's order. Ignorant brat, you dare to say that you'll destroy my Confucian school? The heavens will punish him. Samuraim's mind became colder and colder. Before the sword intent of the first sword had dissipated, the second sword had already rushed out from the sword formation. Halfway through, the sword light trembled slightly, and a hint of purple appeared within the sword. Zhongsho instantly knew that Wei Su had attacked. Moreover, he directly used Xiaoguan's ability to prove the eternal Tao. Coincidentally, at this moment, Zhu body appeared 1,000,000 feet away. His 8-foot body stood above the clouds, looking really majestic. The 3 god venerables each turned into 33 layers of light that stacked behind Zhu's head. He pointed out with a finger and once again clashed with the heaven path sword that slashed down. Instantly, there was a soft pung sound. Zhu's face flushed red and his body leaned back slightly. However, it was obvious that his skills were a level higher. The vast and boundless energy spread out from beneath his feet. As a result, everything, including the surrounding mountains, was annihilated into dust. The entire gorge was once again opened up. The hundreds of mountains nearby all disappeared without a trace in an instant. As for Zhu Shi, he also looked over with a sneer in his eyes. The emperor is leading the people to punish evil. How can he be stopped by you? Zhongsho frowned once more. As expected, with Song Xingdao's strength, it was a little too much for him to go up against the 3 factions of the Cloud World. However, he didn't fear anything and continued to control the sword formation. Since pure strength wasn't enough to suppress the opponent, then he could only chase the changes in the sword formation to increase the strength of the sword. Even if the opponent was an end-realm saint venerable who had 3 god venerables buffing him and was comparable to Xiaoguan, he wouldn't fear anything. He would just go all out and fight. It caused the spiritual wave all around, the spiritual sense of heaven and earth. The majestic power of the King Tao was transferred over through the Avicii throne. The god-refined sword in Zhongsho's hand was also increasing in strength. The grades of the 7 swords were also slowly increasing. Meanwhile, a skinny old man over 12,000 zhang tall and a blue Taoist robe suddenly descended from the sky. He waved his whisk and slashed down towards where Zhu Zi was. Taiching, God venerable. Cries of surprise could be heard from the other side of the mountain range. Zhu Zi was slightly shocked and tossed out a scroll. After spreading it out, many golden words appeared and burned, blocking the sword light formed from God power. His eyes were filled with annoyance. Kenzo sect? It seems like you all really want to interfere. A clear laugh spread out from the void. End realm can't interfere in cloud world matters. That was an agreement 10,000 years ago. Since you all have forgotten about it, then my Kenzo sect naturally doesn't need to follow it. The Kenzo sect and Deqian are allies and have worked well together. How can we sit still and not do anything? He paused and his laughter became more and more joyful. It seems like my Kenzo sect isn't the only one who wants to interfere. The moment he said this, a seven-colored glow appeared in the horizon. At the same time, a Buddhist chant rang out. Yuan Shi Buddha, a 12,000-foot body, stepped on a 12-leaf golden lotus and descended from the sky. He didn't attack Zhu Zi. Instead, he held up a 9-layer relic pagoda and suppressed the sky. The shaking of heaven and earth instantly stopped. The Buddhist light shone brightly and actually buffed the common people's sword formation. Zhu Zi's face turned green. The god venerable in front of him was the incarnation of Amitabha's Buddhist power in the cloud world. Good, very good, very good. Your Buddhist faction is helping the evil. Do you all want to go through another Buddhist slaying calamity? Benefactor, your words are wrong. A golden figure stepped through the air and arrived. He looked really solemn, and his eyes were filled with rage. It was Lankavita. Even Buddhas were angry, and Zhu Zi's words touched his bottom line. He had personally experienced the calamity of the Buddhist faction in the cloud world and was deeply touched. The Buddhist faction was in the wrong and didn't know how to restrain themselves. However, the few factions of the cloud world adding fuel to the fire was also one of the reasons. Let's not talk about whether or not ruler is a cruel ruler. Even if your Confucian faction wants to wipe us out, Taishang has to win this battle first. Zhu Zi wasn't in the mood to reply. The vast sword energy swept towards the mountain range once more. Zhu Zi wasn't empty-handed anymore. He held a brush and pointed over. A man who enjoys himself should first respond to people, follow the laws of the heavens, follow the 5 virtues, respond to nature, and then adjust the 4 seasons and harmonize all things. At that moment, it was like the entire heaven and earth had fallen into Zhu Zi's hands and the tip of the brush. The moment he pointed out, it was filled with the will of the heavens. Zhongshu's eyes constricted, and then he calmed down. Then, let's see if Zhongshu and Shizi's Daos were more compatible with the heavens, or if Zhu Zi's reason was more controlled by the will of the heavens. Come. Where they clashed, there was no sound at all. The brush in Zhu Zi's hand split apart from middle. The heaven path, sword light instantly dissipated. The third time they clashed, it seemed like they were on the same level. However, when the sword light spread out, it split into dozens of streaks and struck towards the few Confucian faction Saint Realm experts. It was as quick as lightning and hard to track. Zhu Zi was furious. The brush in his hand instantly returned to normal. Humans turn into humans and destroy the heavens. The poor have desires. Thus, there are people who go against the heavens and cheat, causing chaos. People have selfish desires, which is why they are in danger. The Tao heart and the heavens are intricate. Destroying selfish desires is the heavens. After the brush was drawn, hundreds of sword lights were directly crushed and dissipated, amongst which there were a few that stood out. Under the guidance of the sword formation, not only were they not crushed, but they became even sharper and stronger. Those few Saint Realm experts' auras instantly collapsed. They tried their best to retreat, using all sorts of methods to block and dodge. As for Zhu Zi, his eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. What is the heavens? Benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, trust. Likes and dislikes have no boundaries. If one can't go back on his words, the heavens will destroy him. Things are infinitely touching and humans have no boundaries. Things turn into things, and humans turn into things. The temptation of material things to people was endless, and people's pursuit of material things was also unrestrained. If they used things to satisfy their desires, then humans were no different from things. Zhongsho laughed coldly. His mind was really calm, and there were no other thoughts. He only focused on controlling the common people's 7 swords to evolve the sword formation to the extreme. He understood that this common people's sword formation was not only an artifact to control the will of the heavens, but it also contained Shi Zi's Tao. Everyone had desires, so how could they be totally wiped out? It was because they had desires that the human race was able to walk step by step to where they were today. Although there were all sorts of dirty things, they also had a glorious civilization. They created numerous things. Creation? Zhongsho was startled. He always thought that Shi Zi's creation true technique was derived from the primordial world. Only today did he finally understand. Just like how Xiaoguan used the Xianhuang great strength technique to prove eternity. Shi Zi also walked the path of the human path to prove the creation grand Tao. No wonder Shi Zi would build this Cang Xing Dao and run around for the people of the world, even falling and being sealed in the cloud world. He had no choice but to do so. This was also the belief in his heart. So that was the case. His thoughts were clear and smooth. Zhongsho instantly laughed out loud. Those common people's 7 swords, the numerous, mysterious, and tough to understand spiritual patterns were comprehended. Zhu Zi found it slightly weird, but he didn't bother and continued to chant his Tao. The human heart is dangerous. The Tao heart is small. The essence is the only thing. This is why the saint's words are only to teach people the Tao of the heavens, to wipe out their desires. One has to wipe out their desires and restore the heavens' Tao before one can learn. Get rid of the bias of their temperament, the cover of their desires, to restore their nature, to restore their morals. Before he could finish his sentence, the sword light made a few clever twists and turns, completely escaping his control. 2 streaks of blood flashed in the distance, and 2 heads flew up. Since you all can level Jade Canyon, naturally I can also chop off your heads. I'm just waiting for the time when all of you have knives and axes on your bodies. Chapter 1071. When the first bit of sunlight shone into the Jade Canyon that didn't exist anymore, Zhu Zi's body had already retreated from this place. At the same time, those few Saint Realm cultivators also disappeared. They couldn't be said to be fleeing in panic, but they were in a really bad state. All of you can flatten the Jade Canyon, so naturally, I can chop off your heads. I, the fatuous ruler, am just waiting for the time when all of you will be slain. Zhongsho's words still rang in their ears. However, at this moment, no one dared to underestimate the common people's 7 swords. When Zhu Zi left, he didn't make a sound. After this person left, the Buddhist faction Amitabha Incarnation and the Kinzo sect Taichin God Venerable all turned into light and left. Even the outer region, Void, totally calmed down. Those few End Realm experts were nowhere to be seen. That was because both sides were similar in strength. The Taoist faction, Confucian faction, and Demon faction were slightly stronger. However, they weren't much stronger. If they went all out, the outcome would be 50-50. However, no matter which side won, they would suffer heavy losses. If they continued to fight, it wouldn't be good for either side. The best course of action was to stop in time. Zhongsho, you brat. Today, 18 million Imperial troops are here. A few days later, when we sweep Nanjiang, let's see if you can still be so gleeful. A furious roar spread out from afar like rumbling thunder. Zhongsho laughed coldly and was too lazy to bother. Why did he have to care about the unwilling words of some stray dogs? He just wanted to get back some face. With the guidance of the sword art, another boundless sword light descended. At the place where the Emerald Gorge was originally located, a huge sword scar that was thousands of kilometers long, thousands of meters deep, and over 100 kilometers wide was carved out. It was like a huge chasm between the 2 armies, separating the 2 sides. At this moment, Zhongsho felt really weird. In the past, he felt that the 7,000-mile evil soul mode outside of Gantian Mountain was unbelievable. However, the current him also had the ability to change mountains and move land. He didn't even need to use the strength of the sword formation, and he could do it. If he was willing, he could even cut the entire Hunlia mountain range in half with a single slash. However, if one destroyed too much, they would definitely be tainted by karma and disturb the earth chi. It might even infuriate the heavens and send down heavenly punishment. With a thought, the god-refined sword flew back. The common people's 7 swords instantly broke apart. Zhongsho's figure gradually descended and landed beside Kong Yao, who had been watching the battle. At this moment, the camp was filled with cheers. Their morale was boosted. Even the stupidest person would know that they had taken advantage of the situation in the Emerald Gorge. Zhongsho looked around the camp, only to see that the worry on many people's faces had lessened by a large amount. His heart instantly relaxed. Now that the Emerald Gorge had completely disappeared, he was really worried that the morale of his subordinates would be affected. After this battle, End Realm won't attack anymore. The agreement from 10,000 years ago is still valid. Although the few End Realms didn't say much, just using their spiritual sense to communicate was enough to reach an agreement. Venerables of the Saint Realm and above were not allowed to participate in this battle. Kong Yao's brow rose up, and she was slightly surprised. It was actually so easy. The Confucian faction had taken a huge loss today. 2 Saint Realm experts fell under Zhongsho's sword once more. In comparison, the Emerald Gorge being leveled wasn't much. However, that Zhu Zi retreated cleanly and didn't bother to haggle over the matter at all. How is that possible? They had no choice. Zhongsho broke into a laugh. If they really fought, both sides would suffer heavy losses. However, Zhu Zi Qingxian knew better than anyone else that even if all the people present were die, they would still be able to survive. Xiaoguan would still be able to live until the end. How is the eternal Dao so weak? His ability to survive was something that even Shi Zi in the past couldn't compare to. If one couldn't use absolute strength to destroy his foundations, it was pretty much impossible to seal and destroy Xiaoguan. How could there be no reason for one person to make so many factions submit? As Zhongsho said this, he looked at the ravine in front of him and felt slightly regretful. Unfortunately, this was all he could do now. Compared to the natural terrain of the Emerald Gorge, it was much weaker. This place can at most block the enemy for 3 days. Yao, you should consider how to retreat from here. I had such intentions long ago. Kong Yao was confident and didn't show any signs of dejection. Even without today's changes, I would still choose to retreat tomorrow. At most, we can only defend here for 10 days, and the casualties will increase every day. It isn't the best place to block the enemy. Kong Yao said this while looking across with a melancholic expression. That Pingnan General Fein was her superior a few years ago. Based on these few days of fighting, this person was still so experienced and vicious when using troops and couldn't be underestimated. She thought back to the past. At that time, out of all the North generals of the Taishang, she was the only one that this old general didn't like. That was because she usually consumed the most resources, but her gains were the least each time. Although her battle records were amazing and she never lost, she was scolded by Fein each time. As time went on, even she started to doubt herself and think that she really didn't have any commanding talent. Until she met Zhongsho, she didn't hesitate to hand over the 1,000,000 troops to him. She could laugh off the matters of the past. However, in her heart, she still felt a little unjust. That year, this person had scolded her hundreds of times as an idiot, and the best counterattack would be to defeat them fair and square on the battlefield, scolding them back with the word idiot. Then, she shook her head and calmed herself down. Kong Yao broke out into a self-mocking laugh. So, she had such time. The hearts of women were really the most petty. Great Gan won because of the Navy, and if we use it well. If we use it well, 2 million troops can go up against 10 million troops. Why we need to tangle with them here? Actually, What I was most worried about was that those Saint Realm experts would attack without any fear. They would casually move a mountain and break a river. That would be problematic. Great Gon had been running the south for many years, and they had 125 toothed cloud ships in the various water systems of the south. The Taishang Navy was unable to enter, so naturally, the Qian ships were the best. However, if a Saint Realm expert attacked and broke the river, then no matter how strong the Navy was, they wouldn't be able to do anything. Since they dared to flatten the Jade Canyon, then these few people would definitely do such a thing. Zhongshu was also worried and knew that Zhu Zi was just probing. However, the moment Zhongshu and Song Xingdao couldn't defend, such a thing would definitely happen. At this moment, he was naturally fine. Looking at how confident Kong Yao was and how calm she was, he was a little entranced. Kong Yao was originally a beauty. Her body was long and slim. At this moment, her silver armor made her look more and more attractive, like a pure and beautiful lily. It made one's imagination run wild, making one feel that even if one looked at it 1,000 times, they wouldn't get tired of it. Thinking back to how soft and gentle she was last night, she was so entangled with him. Zhongshu couldn't help but sigh heavily and wring his hands. This Zhu Zi came at the wrong time. So what if he came a day or two later? Why was he so anxious? Kong Yao finally noticed Zhongshu's burning gaze. Instantly, she guessed what Zhongshu was thinking, her face instantly flushing red. You pervert. Wasn't last night enough? Do you still want me to accompany you in the day? Zhongshu kept silent and didn't reply. His lips curled up with a deep meaning. With his flirting skills, as long as he continued, it wouldn't be difficult. Kong Yao was both embarrassed and annoyed. Her heart was also slightly panicking. Thinking back to how, if those few Saint Realm experts didn't flatten the mountain, she would have stayed in Zhongshu's arms and not been willing to get up. She wouldn't have been able to escape from this fellow's demonic palms. However, she wasn't willing to show weakness. Scoffing, Kong Yao avoided his gaze in case she fell into Zhongshu's sky fox illusionary eyes. During these few years, Yao has been conquering the south, and many tribes have submitted to me. However, although the Southland is rich and fertile, many tribes are weak. Due to years of war, most of them are really poor and lack resources. However, to show respect to Mighty Qian, many tribes offered their most outstanding and beautiful girls as tributes to Mighty Qian Monster King. I didn't dare to take charge and couldn't reject them. I could only accept them and wait for you to deal with them when you return. Zhongshu was really confused. Why did he feel that Kong Yao's tone was more and more off? Offering girls as tributes? He wasn't a perverted ruler. To a swordsman, girls weren't something he needed. Moreover, with Xinyuan Irin and Kong Yao, beauties with talents and auras, how would he be interested in normal girls? Like that Zhao Yanran, even if she was top in the world, he wasn't tempted by her. Kong Yao knew his personality and directly retreated. Why didn't she dare to take charge? It wasn't good for her to reject and wait for him to deal with it when he returned. What was she doing? A month ago, I recruited 300,000 strongmen. A new palace was built for my husband on the Godfall plain you mentioned. Zhongshu was totally confused and didn't understand what she meant. Kong Yao continued, with me here, we will definitely be able to block the Taishang. Since you have nothing to do, why not move to the palace? Share the joy of having sex with those beautiful girls? Stunned, Zhongshu came back to his senses. In other words, you are planning to use me as bait? Kong Yao's watery eyes turned into crescents as she smiled. It isn't that there aren't any other methods, but they are all too problematic. Only this one is the simplest. You have a bad reputation, so you probably won't mind. Zhongshu thought about it carefully and thought that it was really the case. When both sides were fighting, he was far away from the battlefield. He forcefully searched for beautiful girls from various races, doing it in the luxurious palace that was built from the blood of the people. No matter how one looked at it, it was the actions of an incapable ruler. Those Confucian faction people would definitely be happy to see him killed here to prove Zhu Zi's imperial edict. Godfalling Plains was far away from the battlefield, but the nearby terrain was most suitable for an elite army to sneak attack. This plan isn't appropriate. Zhong Shou didn't hesitate to shake his head. Although he didn't care much about his reputation, there was no need to purposely do that and make his reputation worse. Is that so? Kong Yao wasn't disappointed and said leisurely, "A few days ago, Sister Erin sent me a letter. She said that many people in Qian think that you aren't taking in concubines because you can't get close to girls. You seem to be really concerned about this." The moment she said this, Zhong Shou's face turned green. Chapter 1072. The newly built temporary imperial residence could indeed be described with the word grand. When Zhong Shou arrived here under the protection of tens of thousands of cavalry, he was slightly shocked. Compared to Hanyan Palace, it was like heaven and earth. Even if the former was repaired, it was built by Zhong Weiran after all, so it was naturally a little stingy. As for the palace in front of him, who knew who built it? It was beside mountains and water. It wasn't purely looking for beauty and magnificence. Instead, it was cleverly combined with the geography of this place and the primitive forest. The pavilions and terraces were all exquisite and unique. Although it gave off a majestic aura, it was also beautiful and fresh. Looking at it, it was like a celestial realm. It merged into the mountains and rivers of this place without any sense of awkwardness at all. Not only was the scenery great, but it was also a cultivation holy land. Even the Juntian Celestial Palace that Zhong Shou loved couldn't be compared to it. Every day one would stay here and look at the natural scenery of the garden, the weird mountains and rocks, clear springs and lakes. One would definitely feel relaxed and happy. Zhong Shou's annoyed mood also became slightly better. How much did this palace cost? Did it really come from the military? He thought to himself that if it really came from the military, then this time he would have really profited. Hu Zhongyuan, who came along, looked over like he was looking an idiot. How can it all come from the military? It is just temporarily borrowing it. The inspector has already sent a letter to the cabinet saying that he wants to use the treasury. The prime minister has already approved it. Zhong Shou's face twitched, thinking to himself that that was the case. This palace in front of him still needed to be paid for by his own family. At this moment, 20% of the Cloud World Qian's income each year went to the treasury. Along with the investment of the green cloudstone path and the various medicine gardens, they could earn thousands of celestial stones each year. However, the expenditure was also huge. After this battle, they would definitely recruit more royal family helpers. They would also need to provide for more spirit-changing demon-slaying warriors and source ocean demon-slaying warriors. His Book of Ian was a bottomless hole that couldn't be filled. This palace in front of him was like cutting off his flesh. Originally, if only Rimbo agreed, it would be useless. However, Kong Yao was his princess consort. Cut the crap. How much does it cost? We invited a famous garden expert from the mid-plains to help. There were also dozens of celestial realm cultivators to set up the spiritual protecting formation. The materials used were all top grade. A total of 400 low-grade immortal stones. The inspector said that if it wasn't so extravagant, it wouldn't be enough to bewitch people. 400 low-grade immortal crystals? Was that all Zhong Shouxin wanted? Forget it, it's nothing. He was rich and could afford it. A Tai Divine Lightning Warship cost 2,000 low-grade immortal stones. That Hu Zhongyan, however, still wanted to continue. There are also those 300,000 strong and able-bodied men. On the surface, it is called enlisting laborers, but in reality, it is to control and win over the tribes of the southern border. They were all at the peak of Grade 3, and there were over 20,000 Grade 4 martial masters and spirit cultivators. The inspector said that Junshang had already exempted all corvée labor. Even in the southern border, he could not make an exception. This was why the wages couldn't be low, which was why he added another 120 low-grade immortal stones. If it wasn't for so many people who had the ability to lift 10,000 kilograms, how would they be able to build such a palace in a month? Zhong Shou nearly spat out blood, his eyes fainting. This Kong Yao really didn't treat money as money. She was really helping others. Sooner or later, his entire fortune would be squandered away by this woman. The good mood from before was totally gone. The scenery in front of him was still really beautiful and pleasing to the eye. However, in Zhongsho's eyes, every blade of grass and tree here contained the blood and tears of Zhongsho. While sighing, a look of praise flashed across Samuraim's eyes. At this moment, Kong Yao probably had another 300,000 elite troops who had been through hundreds of battles to use. The land of the southern border was fertile, but wars were endless. They also had to go against those endless beasts. Although it was a barbaric land, martial path and spiritual cultivation were really developed. The population was small, but the experts that were produced each year far exceeded other places. After going through numerous battles, they could form an army the moment they were gathered. They didn't even need to train. The barbarian race was simple and righteous. As long as they were recruited with benefits, they would fight to the death for them. Kong Yao, she really had good methods. Dejected, Zhongsho walked into the palace while being surrounded. Then, he saw that the palace was filled with beauties. All of them were natural beauties. Maybe because they were all from the southern barbarian race, their skin color was healthy and they were filled with energy. They weren't like those palace maids who were weak and sickly. Hu Zhongyuan was dazzled for a moment. His eyes darted all over the place, almost drooling. Zhongsho was also distracted for a moment, thinking to himself that Kong Yao was really bold to place so many beauties in front of him. He scoffed in his heart, thinking to himself, was she looking down on him? If she really made him annoyed, he would go crazy and marry 8 to 10 concubines to make her an Iran regret. He was unhappy in his heart, so he vented his anger on Hu Zhongyuan. He heavily patted Hu Zhongyuan's shoulder. A surge of true qi entered, causing Hu Zhongyuan's entire body to creak and groan. The bones in his body felt like they were about to fall apart. What are you looking at? Everything within the palace belongs to me. How can you look at it? If you continue, I will dig out your eyes. Hu Zhongyuan's body was powerless, like there were 10,000 ants biting him as he laid on the ground. He knew that he was implicated once more, but he didn't care, smiling. Ruler, that isn't appropriate. Shouldn't you reward 1 or 2 beauties to win over loyal subjects? You are a good general? What loyal subject? Zhongsho scoffed in disdain. He knew that Hu Zhongyuan's face was thicker than a city wall, so he casually waved his sleeves. Forget it. I can't be bothered with you. These girls will be sent back in the future. I have no power to deal with them. If you like anyone, you can ask for them yourself. As long as you don't use force, you can do whatever you want. If you can bring them away, then you have the ability. He turned his head and said, "It is the same for you." These words were directed at the Gantian mountain generals following behind him. They were all delighted, their eyes shining as they looked at the passing maidservants like wolves. Hu Zhongyan was delighted, rubbing his fists and preparing to show off the methods of Gantian Mountain City's young master Hu. Zhongsho seemed to have thought about something, smiling with deep meaning. Oh, right. I remember the day before yesterday when concubine Yao chose you as her partner. You, Hu Zhongyan, were unwilling. You said that it was boring to accompany me and that you wanted to stay under concubine, Yao to have a good battle with the Taishan troops. After thinking about it, I decided to fulfill your wish. As you wish, you could go back tomorrow and serve under concubine Yao. Hu Zhongyuan's face was ashen white as he groaned. He thought to himself that his ruler was a little too evil. Chu Shui hugged the blood moon blade and followed on the other side of Zhongsho. At this moment, her hand was touching her lips as she giggled. Zhongsho didn't bother about this fellow, stepping into the palace, and his mood changed. This palace was already built. Even if it was destroyed, he wouldn't be able to get back the celestial stones. Rather than being annoyed, why not open up and enjoy it? Only then would he not lose out. He was originally a luxurious person. However, due to the frequent use of the Book of Ian, he was poor, which was why he restrained himself. Actually, he was really happy with this palace. At this moment, knowing that it was built with the money from his treasury, he felt at ease. Walking over, as expected, there wasn't a single place that wasn't beautiful. The steps made of white jade were untainted by dust. Those stone paths looked really normal, but they were all made of pigeon bloodstones that were worth grade 7 mine stones. Not only was it low profile and beautiful, but it also had a different kind of beauty. It was also one of the foundations of the formation. When he walked deep into the palace, Zhongsho was startled. Is this the wine pool and meat forest? Numerous top-grade celestial wines were all poured into a giant white jade pool. It shone with an amber-colored glow. Just the wine fragrance alone was enough to make one drunk. It wasn't as exaggerated as the meat forest, but the tables around were filled with delicacies. They smelled and looked good, making one salivate. The fragrance of the dishes and wine mixed together, making one's appetite rise. This was even worse than Jiezhou in the past. He remembered that in ancient history, Jiezhou just hung pieces of cooked meat beside the wine pool. How could it be compared to now, where there were top chefs who carefully cooked? The meat forest method was already outdated. Who knew that little Yao would actually fall? Zhongsho felt pained. Thinking back to when Kong Yao saw his hall filled with gold bricks, she was filled with disdain. He casually took a jade cup and scooped a cup from the wine pool. Tasting it carefully, he only felt a sweet fragrance in his mouth, like the jade pool flowing down his throat. Zhong Shaxin was stunned for a moment. 9 fragrant spiritual dew. Was it made by Shangwan Jinru? Zhongsho had long heard about this girl who made Lei Dong and Ruotao fall in love with her. He had tasted many of the wine that this girl brewed, but unfortunately, he didn't have the chance to see it. The generals behind him were all at a loss, not knowing what was going on. A female official at the side bowed. It is the 9 fragrant spiritual dew. Half a month ago, concubine Yao bought 50 jugs at once. Zhongsho broke into a laugh. Was little Yao worried that he would be lonely in this palace? It was not bad to have good wine to accompany him. Since there is a wine pool and meat forest, then let's call this palace Juqi Palace. He had noticed that this palace didn't have a name. Juqi Palace? Hu Zhongyuan pinched his chin and thought about it seriously. That's not bad. However, I think it's better to call it Gold Palace, White Jade Palace, Meat Forest Palace. They are more luxurious. They are worthy of the ruler's aura. Before he finished, Zhongsho used his finger to smack him heavily. He didn't dare to speak anymore. Just at this moment, Zhongsho saw a spiritual light descend from the sky and land in front of him. It was a message talisman. Zhongsho casually held it in his hand, following which he laughed out. Our army has won, killing 320,000. Half a day ago, Kong Yao's army started to retreat from Jade Canyon. However, when the Taishang chased and the army passed through that sword mark, they struck halfway, using brute force to break through. They pretty much killed the Taishang general on the battlefield. He had no choice but to retreat back to the north shore, looking on as the Qian army retreated. Chapter 1073. There were many beauties in the palace, but Zhongsho wasn't in the mood to enjoy them. These barbarian race girls were mostly cute and innocent. However, since Zhongsho had enjoyed the top delicacies in the world, his appetite was spoiled. How would he be interested in these girls? Most of the time, he sat alone and comprehended the sword technique. That day when he comprehended Shizi's Dao, Zhongsho felt that his sword technique had improved by a lot. Naturally, he couldn't comprehend Shizi's creation true technique just like that. However, that day when he controlled the sword formation, he had some understanding of the restrictions and talismans within. He could merge them into his sword technique and gain some benefits. What a waste. I have comprehended too little. However, although this technique isn't necessary for me, to my brother Ao, it is really useful. His spiritual energy transformed, and in an instant, a high-grade earth-grade message talisman turned into a wild crane that flew out of the Juqi Palace. His comprehension of the creation true technique could only be carried by this top talisman paper. Actually, it wasn't of much use. However, Shizi's Dao was born from the human path. This would definitely surprise Ao Kuan. After sending out the talisman, Zhongsho stopped studying the restrictions he got from the common people's 7 swords. Shizi's Dao was one of the top Daos in the world, even above the creation laws. However, Zhongsho's Dao path was set, and he didn't have the heart to serve the country and people. It was best if he gave up. Most of his time was spent studying the massacring sword intent and slaying sword intent. Massacring and slaying, the latter was far above the former. However, there were similarities between the two. The massacring sword intent had already broken through to the late spirit realm. Along with that, the slaying sword intent was the easiest to break through. Zhong Shaxin had a feeling that after this battle, there would be a killing feast. The weapon in his hand had to be sharp. Demonic path. The strands of sharp and fierce hostility were constantly tearing at Zhongsho's chest, gnawing at his internal organs. There was no need to wait any longer. Apart from practicing his swordsmanship every day, Zhongsho also diverted some of his energy to observe the situation in front of him. Every evening, he would read the battle reports that came from the front lines one by one, leaving nothing out. Ever since the Qian army of 2 million retreated from the south of the Honglian mountain range for 4 days, there were only reports of victory and almost no defeats. Even if the Taishang had made ample preparations, it would still be difficult for them to advance. The 18 million strong army was split into a dozen groups by the water webs and swamps. This gave Kong Yao the chance to make use of the navy to send 800,000 elites to the back of the Taishang. Just this battle alone had wiped out 400,000 enemies. Then they used offense as defense, going head-on against the left wing of the Taishang army in a delta plains. In just a few days, they finally broke the million-strong army. When the Taishang reinforcements arrived, Kong Yao's forces had already left on the cloud ships. 3 battles in 10 days, all of which were huge victories. After this, the Taishang army started to be really careful. Kong Yao was unable to find any more chances, but the south-conquering general and Emperor Yuanshan weren't having a good time either. It could be said that it was difficult to move forward. They were firmly blocked north of the Min River and could not advance an inch. At this moment, what was more problematic was that Kong Yao was clearing out the wilderness in this region. All the tribes had already retreated when they heard the news. In this region, they were unable to obtain a single grain. As expected by Zhongsho, the Taoist faction and Confucian faction interfered with numerous heaven and earth bags supporting them. As for the remaining 17 million troops, they could still barely hold on. The battle was at a standstill. Although Kong Yao was still able to make use of the navy to gain some gains. However, to be like those few people at the start, easily killing 300,000 to 400,000, they were unable to do so. However, Kong Yao's commanding talents were on full display. Using those forces, the 3 million troops were able to go up against an enemy 6 times their number, and they weren't at a disadvantage at all. They didn't bother about fighting for one city or one land. Instead, they were flexible and focused on attacking the enemy's weak points. Once they grasped the weakness, they would ferociously attack. However, once the situation was bad, they would swiftly retreat, not breaking away from the water. This caused the Taishang to be unable to deal with them despite having tens of millions of troops. If we keep the people and lose the land, then both the people and the land will exist. If we keep the land and lose the people, then both the people and the land will be lost. Like he was afraid that Zhongsho would misunderstand, Kong Yao wrote in such a way. Zhongsho didn't care. Actually, it didn't matter if they lost this southern land. Naturally, he didn't care. At this moment, Song Shengdao's 50,000 common people, mysterious dragon warriors, and the Kinzo sect's 35,000 Moyang sword cavalry all came under Kong Yao. It caused the entire defensive line to become more stable. What shocked Zhongsho the most was the Buddhist faction. They sent a full 20,000 monk soldiers under Zhongsho's command. There were very few who were good at fighting, but they were good at the merciful thousand-leaf living scripture and were good at healing injuries. 3,000 people formed up and chanted the Vajra Ming King incantation. It could buff 300,000 troops within 50 miles. It was the same as a grade 5 spiritual artifact armor, and its defensive strength was shocking. Kong Yao was especially delighted. Just these 20,000 monk soldiers made her happier than when she got the 50,000 common people, mysterious dragon warriors. That Lanka Buddha also made a trip to Jiochi Palace to meet Zhongsho. The reason why these 20,000 Vajragardian monks are temporarily serving under the monarch is not because the monarch is the future boundless Buddha of our sect. It is because of the alliance between the Qian and the Buddhist faction. Since our ally is in trouble, we have to help. Apart from that, it also involves the battle between the 6 factions of the Cloud World. I hope that you don't misunderstand and don't mind it. Thank you very much. I will remember your kindness in lending a helping hand when your sect was in danger. Zhongsho laughed. He had a much better impression of the Buddhist faction, especially this Lanka Buddha in front of him. If these 20,000 protector monk soldiers were here because of his position as the future unlimited beginning and end Buddha, then they would definitely be grateful to him. Then, no matter how much he felt that it was a pity, he had to chase them away. However, since they were allies, then he had no qualms about using them. On the contrary, he felt like he owed the Buddhist faction a favor. After Lang Kavo finished speaking, he frowned again. Looking around, the area in front of him was just too extravagant. Outside of the wine pool and meat forest, in the garden, there were pretty much all the rare beasts in the world. Even a maid in the palace was a beauty that could topple a city if placed outside. I don't understand. There were many battles at the Min River, and tens of thousands of people died. Why does ruler still have the mood to feast in the palace and indulge in women? Zhong Shaksin was helpless. He obviously wasn't willing, but he had to answer. He casually said, "In my eyes, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form." It didn't refer to the beauty in front of him, but to everything that could be seen or not. These things were just illusions that people created. Emptiness was the essence of things. In other words, what Lanka Buddha saw might not be real, and he didn't see through the surface. Lanka Buddha's body shook, and he stared right at Zhongsho. His gaze was so hot that it was terrifying. He then bowed solemnly. "Ruler is really fated with my Buddha. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Lanka Buddha has learned something. If I can achieve anything in the future, it is all because of the words of the Buddha." Zhongsho was stunned. These words came from the Buddhist faction and were from the Maha Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra. Did the Buddhist faction not have such a sutra? The Kinzo sect's Ling Chan was also at the side. He didn't know what the two of them were talking about, but he had a weird expression on his face as he looked at the extremely luxurious palace. At this moment, he was really suspicious. Was this Zhongsho really the saint ruler? Was he the master of the Qilin? Did Hua Ruo see it wrongly? The two of them were both cultivators and couldn't stay in this place with so many beauties. After seeing Zhongsho, they hurriedly left. After the two of them left, another person arrived. It was Zhang Huai. Based on what this person said, all the resources and grain had been prepared. They were placed in a safe place and were enough for the army for 10 years. They didn't need to worry about logistics. At this moment, he was really free and didn't want to miss this battle to determine the Cloud World dominance, which was why he came over. I heard that Emperor Yuanshan is already building shipyards at the north shore of Min River. There are also hundreds of God Realm cultivators who are prepared to use their powers to transport the five-tooth cloud ships from Taishang to Min River. Zhongsho's lips curled up. The Taishang was preparing to build a navy in Min River. However, building ships needed time, and it wasn't easy to transport the ready ones over. Song Xingdao and the cultivators of the Sword faction and Buddhist faction weren't weak. Even the Deqian had many tributes. Moreover, the Taishang didn't have so much time to drag on. I have checked the tax income of Huizhou and South Wind Cloud Continent and noticed that there was always some money that disappeared. Rimba actually didn't object. I wonder if you can teach me? I knew that I wouldn't be able to hide it from ruler. Zhang Huai laughed out loud. He took all the money to buy grain within Taishang. At least 20% of the grain produced by Taishang was taken by the Deqian merchants. They even dug out all the grain in the Taishang treasury. The Deqian country itself didn't lack food. Instead, it was rich every year. So, I think that Emperor Yuanchen should have noticed that the grain in the treasury can only last for 3 months. So, this shipyard is just to mislead people. Samarim gave out a mocking smile. They were stopped at the north shore of Min River and couldn't advance. However, there was a problem with the grain supply. To the Taishang, apart from ending the battle quickly, they had no other choice. In other words, the day that he was looking forward to wouldn't exceed 10 days. Shaking his head, Zhong Shou changed the topic. Concubine Yao definitely wouldn't have thought of this Juqi palace. Was it Zhang Huai's idea? Zhang Huai felt slightly awkward and could only bow towards Zhong Shou apologetically. Zhong Shou scoffed coldly in dissatisfaction, following which his expression changed. He reached out and pulled Chu Xue, who was standing at the side, into his arms. He forcefully kissed Xue's lips, a hand reaching into Chu Xue's embrace. Chu Xue exclaimed before she calmed down. She could feel an intent reaching into the palace. Chapter 1074. That Kong Yao is really careful when she uses troops, sneak attacking many times like she's taking risks, but she doesn't give anyone a chance. Fei Yin is useless, and it is impossible to crush her army in 1.5 months. Fei Yin's face was filled with defeat. During these days, he was really anxious, and he didn't have the aura that he used to have when he didn't care about Kong Yao. During these tens of days, this woman who he saw as a mediocre general had taken a huge blow to him. However, she needs to meet a wise ruler to be able to show off her skills. Like how a top sword needs to be in the hands of a top swordsman to be able to show off its sharpness. However, if it landed in the hands of ordinary people, it would only be slightly sharper than ordinary iron, not enough to be used as a weapon. However, the person that Kong Yao is serving is such a preposterous ruler. Everyone frowned, totally confused. They didn't understand what Fei Yin meant. Following which, Fei Yin continued. That Kong Yao led millions of troops to fight a tough battle with our Taishang south of Min River. This Zhong Shou is thousands of miles away drinking and having fun in the Juqi Palace. He celebrates every day, snatching girls from the various races to satisfy his desires. I really feel that Kong Yao is not worth it. To think that she would actually marry such a tyrannical and muddle-headed person. Everyone shook their heads. What was the point of saying all this? It was because there was such a top commander like Kong Yao at the front that the Zhong Shou could relax and enjoy in the back. This was something that others couldn't get. In the end, Yin made a mistake and allowed this future pillar of the Taishang to become the concubine of that Zhong Shou. At this moment, it seemed like a fresh flower was stuck in cow dung. Fei Yin saw that Yu's face was filled with impatience, and his expression was really ugly. Only then did he stop talking and get to the main topic. We didn't need to forcefully attack. Actually, we just needed to wait for a few months. We knew that the Deqian army would be unhappy with what their ruler did, and there would be internal strife. That Zhong Shou snatched barbarian race girls from the south. Sooner or later, the various clans will be forced to rebel. Our Taishang can win without fighting, but His Majesty is a wise man. Presumably he cannot bear to see those barbarians suffer. He cannot bear to burden our Taishang people because of the stalemate of the war. This battle had to be ended quickly. After careful consideration, I have come to the conclusion that we can only capture the leader of the bandits. Capture the ringleader. A smile appeared on Yu's face as he heard the respect in Fei Yin's words. However, the words of this southern conquering general were deeply in line with his thoughts. Indeed, he didn't want to delay for too long. Those barbarians had nothing to do with him. However, if he continued to fight with his troops here, he would have to pay more taxes. He had to be extremely careful about this matter. When he heard the last sentence, his heart skipped a beat. My dear minister, what you mean is to abandon everything else and attack the Juqi Palace directly. As soon as he said this, the eyes of the people in the imperial study lit up. The generals, in particular, seemed to be deep in thought. Your Majesty is wise. That is my intention. Fei Yin smiled. His expression became more and more respectful. Cang Xingdao, common people's 7 swords, and also the Deqian country. They are all related to Zhongsho. If this person dies, then everything can be solved. I also know that there are large amounts of grain near the Juqi Palace. If we can obtain it, it can feed our Taishang army for 2 months. At that time, all the dangers can be easily solved. Inyu suddenly stood up. He was already tempted. However, there were still some questions that hadn't been solved. To the north of Min River, the closest place to that Juqi Palace is 2,700 li. The person who spoke was a Taoist on the right. His aura was retracted, and he was no different from a normal person. However, he was also a saint venerable. Since Kong Yao is so careful, then it is impossible for him to attack from such a distance. How can our Taishang attack the enemy's nest? In less than 10 miles, we will be noticed. That bloodsore monster lord isn't dead. His sword technique is amazing, and his movement technique isn't weak either. If the situation isn't good, wouldn't he know how to run? Inyu looked right at Fei and waited for him to speak. The words of the few of them spoke out the questions in his heart. How difficult is that? The Taoist faction has the 1,000-mile escaping armor, and the demon faction has the demon space hiding technique. It won't be difficult to move the army 2,800 li away. The expressions of the 3 Taoist faction venerables changed. Although the 1,000-mile escaping armor did have such an ability, it consumed a lot of energy, and the Taoist faction wouldn't use it easily. Moreover, Zhongsho had the world-burning blood-eye ability and the world-burning flame to lock down space. To do that, they would need dozens of Saint Realm venerables to work together and even suffer losses. Fane still said confidently, "As for how to prevent Zhongsho from escaping, it is really simple. With the strength of the Taoist faction, Demon faction, and Confucian faction, it isn't difficult to create a space-locking formation. If we are willing to spend, even if he has the Liu family world-burning blood, we can trap and kill him. You are too optimistic. Our Taoist faction has the 1,000-mile escaping armor, and that Song Shengdao has the void-crossing technique. He can also teleport 100,000 troops close to the Juqi Palace. That Zhongsho is from the fox race and has always been cunning. If this Juqi Palace is actually a trap, I'm talking about if, then what should we do? This is why this time we need to teleport at least 800,000 elites. All the Dao soldiers have to go all out. Fane's expression became brighter and brighter, and he became more and more confident. Our army's problem is that we can't have a head-on battle with that Kong Yao. With these 800,000 troops, it didn't matter whether or not Kong Yao was able to teleport her elites over. Whether or not this Juqi Palace is a trap. With the strength of our Taishang's 800,000 troops, we can crush it. Inyu came to a sudden understanding, and a look of admiration appeared in his eyes. This plan could work, and was the only way to break the situation. It was okay if they didn't use that Song Shengdao's void-crossing technique. If they did, then forcing Kong Yao to have a final battle in the Juqi Palace was not a bad idea. However, at this moment, he didn't say a word, sitting down quietly and waiting. To teleport 100,000 troops 1,000 miles in the air, it would allow the Taishang to worship a Saint Realm venerable for a full 50 years. 800,000 elites, 2,800 miles, the consumption was shocking. Their Taishang family definitely couldn't afford it. The room was silent once more. After a long while, Shuizhai suddenly said decisively, "This method can work. Our Confucian faction is willing to bear a third of the cost. 4 Saint Realm venerables can join in." No one was surprised. The hatred of Dongzi's death was something that the Confucian faction felt. Even if they used up all the water in the rivers and lakes, they wouldn't be able to wash it away. Zhu Zi would definitely pay any price to wipe out the Deqian country. With this person's words, they finally broke the stalemate. Yintai, who spoke before, smiled. Our Taoist faction can bear a quarter of the cost to support this plan. 5 Saint Realm venerables and that 1,000-mile hiding technique will be shared with all of you. His gaze was changing. Zhongsho was the top prince of the Liu family. If the Taoist faction wasn't willing to offend such a giant being, then the best way would be to capture and trap this kid. Then, they would use the Qingming matter to get an explanation from the Liu family. The Liu family people in power would probably be happy to see that happen. As the only pure-blooded descendant of the Liu family, although he had an important position in the Liu family, whether or not he could become the sky-burning Saint Emperor was something worth discussing. However, looking at the intentions of the Confucian faction, it seemed like they had to kill Zhongshu before they were willing to stop. Where the righteousness was, even if there were millions of people, would they have to go? They were prepared to go all out to take revenge. However, to be able to borrow the hands of the Confucian faction and the Taishang was also a good idea. Didn't the bloodsore monster lord have a deep animosity with the Taoist faction and was like a thorn in their eyes? At this time, any ambitious cultivator in the Tao sect was dissatisfied with Taoist Qingxian. This Taoist ancestor really worried too much. Was the sky-burning Liu family really so terrifying? Outside of their country, they only had 3 Saint Venerables and 9 End-Realm God Venerables. What does Brother Blood Saint think? The Confucian faction was really stubborn. Even if they worked together, they weren't willing to talk to the demon faction and didn't come into direct contact with them. At this moment, since they were discussing such a huge matter, only their Taoist faction could contact them. At this moment, outside of the carriage in the deep night sky, a bone-chilling laugh spread out. Interesting, really interesting. We can agree if you want us to. We can even take out a quarter of the Mind Stones and the Demon Space hiding technique. However, we want half of Southwind Cloud Continent and also Huizhou. Inyu frowned slightly and then calmed down. It wasn't the richest and most elite Donglin Cloud Continent. At least the demon faction knew their place. Anyways, in name, the Taishang would still give out the titles. However, the demon faction would choose the marquee. To him, there wasn't much loss. The Blood Saint Demon Lord continued to laugh. There's also that Monster King Zhongshu and all the 8-tailed Sky Fox Zone family people. After you capture them, you need to hand them over to me. My sex Taisher Demon Lord hates him to the bone. Everyone was indifferent to the latter part of the sentence. It was a good thing to shift the blame to Taisher Demon Lord. Anyways, this Demon Lord didn't fear the Liu family. Even Liu Li didn't have any objections. If this Zhongshu fell into the hands of the demon faction, his outcome would be even worse. On the contrary, their Confucian faction was the righteous path and couldn't go all out. At most, they could only let this stupid ruler die. Half of Southwind Cloud Continent is enough. Adding in Huizhou is too much. The demon faction can only take one out of the 2. Before Yuntai finished, he heard a cold scoff from outside. He didn't care at all, looking towards Shuai with a questioning gaze. Liu Li took in a deep breath before nodding his head. Okay. Hearing those words, Inyu knew that this matter was settled. A bright glow appeared in his eyes as he looked at the map. At most, in 2 days, all the problems could be solved. Then, a confused expression appeared on his face. Jochi Palace was still okay. It sounded quite elegant. However, what was the meaning of this god Falling Plains? He heard that Zhongshu personally named it. Wasn't this god Falling Plains name a little too inauspicious? At the same time, Kong Yao was looking out at the stars. Her expression was one of relief. The moment she waited for had finally arrived. It is about time to begin. The moment she said this, Kong Yao turned to the side and looked at Song Xingdao and Mingyu, who were standing with their hands behind their backs. I will have to trouble the venerables this time. Why do you say that? Mingyu smiled. With the ruler's world-burning eyes, this void-crossing god technique will be much easier. To be able to personally see junior brother and sister-in-law kill the Tao soldiers of the 2 factions, Mingyu is looking forward to it. At this moment, in front of him were the 30,000 Qian Blood Cloud Cavalry, 50,000 Common People's Qian Dragon Warriors, 35,000 Moyong Sword Cavalry, as well as 60,000 Big Dipper soldiers. Chapter 1075. Outside of the Imperial City, a prisoner carriage was slowly moving towards the city gates. After entering the 4th month, it rained continuously. Due to Emperor Yuanshen personally leading the troops, the roads that had a layer of yellow soil were now filled with holes and mud. The cloud-crossing carriage wasn't affected, but the normal carriages suffered. Just as they entered 10 miles of the imperial city, they could see that the sides of the streets were filled with refugees. Most of them didn't have clothes to cover their bodies. Their faces were yellow, and their bodies were thin, hungry, and filled with despair. Why are there so many refugees again? Why aren't those rich families coming out to give them porridge? On the prisoner carriage, Zhang Li, who was in charge of escorting the prisoners, looked forward in shock. What he saw was pretty much hell on earth. What else can they do? Pretty much everyone in the imperial court is saying that the Taishang is thriving and that Emperor Yuanshan is a wise ruler. At this moment, the country is peaceful and the people are living in peace. Which family would be so blind to run outside the city to give porridge? Wouldn't that make His Majesty look bad? It is a rare, peaceful era, but you went to help these jobless people. Aren't you afraid that people will say that they have bad intentions? Even if His Majesty doesn't mind, these rich families won't be able to take the blame for winning the hearts of the people. The voice spread out from the small cage behind. His tone was filled with mocking intent. Zhang Li's face twitched as he looked behind him. He saw a fatty sitting in the prisoner carriage. Even with the identity of a prisoner, his face was flushed red and he was laughing coldly. Not stopping, the people under him have no way to make a living. However, he uses the crime of going against the law to attack other countries. Would the rations be able to last? 10 million troops in a month. Who knows how many more people in the world will have no way out? Zhang Li listened on at the side and laughed bitterly. If these words were to be heard by others, what would they do? He was just a grade 9 patrol inspector. How could he take the blame? He wanted to shut Jin Buhui's mouth. However, he knew that his background was really strong. Even if he was in a difficult situation, he wasn't someone that Zhang Li could offend. Sir Jin, please be careful with your words. Jin Buhui still wanted to continue, acting like he didn't hear anything and continued to talk. Millions of refugees have gathered near the imperial city, but His Majesty doesn't know about it. No, it isn't that he doesn't know. Maybe he doesn't see it. He knows about it, but acts like he doesn't know. Most of the granaries in the world have been sold out by those officials. At most, only 20% of the amount is left on the books. His Majesty thought that it was still the time when he had just succeeded the throne and reformed the governance. He worried about the heavens, afraid of losing the hearts of the soldiers and causing chaos in the world. But he didn't know that the more he worried, he would lose. Great Shang has a total of 47 million troops. However, at least 40% of the troops in the mainland are empty. It will be fine if we win. However, if we lose, how are we going to maintain this vast dynasty? There's a saying in military books that one must first consider defeat before thinking about victory. He was staking everything on a single throw, not caring about the consequences. Is it that I, Jin Buhui, do not understand? Or is His Majesty crazy? That Zhu, she can be killed. He knows that the world is in chaos and is in danger. He didn't persuade His Majesty to rest up and calm down the refugees. Instead, he instigated the army because of his own personal grievances. How is he a saint? Zhong Shou started troops at a young age and won every battle. Now that he has Kong Yao helping him, how can he be so easy to deal with? Even if he drags on in the south, he will be able to drag down the Taishang. We will definitely lose this battle. If the Taishang wins, then dig out my eyeballs. His words caused one's heart to palpitate. Beside the prisoner carriage, the few constables of the Ministry of Justice all had ashen white faces. Any one of these words could be said to be disgraceful and heresy. If people found out, they might even be dragged down. Jin Buhui suddenly stopped and looked above, only to see a sword light fly over from a distance. Senior Brother Suchin? On that sword light stood a green shirt person. It was Han Sek Suchin. His brows were tightly furrowed as he looked at Jin Buhui with a complicated expression. Jin Buhui smiled when he saw the situation. Did Master ask you to find me? Your master asked me to save you. Run as far as you can. Suchin sighed. Their identities are inconvenient and they can't attack, so they could only inform me. Your master regretted and said that he saw that you were the most slippery and suitable to be an official. which was why he asked you to come down the mountain to become a Taishang official. Who knew that you would end up like this? Your personality is actually so soft on the outside, but tough on the inside. I didn't expect that either. Jean Buhue shook his head. His face was filled with self-mockery. Every time I want to pretend that I didn't see anything, I would think about what Master taught me when I was young. Although I don't study much, the righteous energy in my chest can't be wiped out. What can I do? Righteous energy? You really know how to brag. Suchin broke into a laugh and shook his head. Then, he said seriously, do you know that you're asking to die? The Taishang was ordered by Zhu Zi to attack the south. Everyone in the world praised Emperor Yuanqin for his righteous actions. However, you didn't know what was good for you and sent such a letter. Not only was Emperor Yuanqin furious, but even your Confucian faction, Saint Zhu Zi, hated you. Why'd you do that? Since Suchin came, Zhang Li and the others were suppressed by his sword intent and couldn't move at all. When they heard those words, they were all astonished. He said it so openly and without hiding anything at all. This surnamed Su sword cultivator probably didn't even think about leaving them alive. In other words, His Majesty has already given birth to killing intent towards me, using my head to calm down those aristocratic families and vassal towns. Jean Buhue's brows rose up. He wasn't surprised. His expression was really calm. Before I sent the letter, I predicted it. Since you already know, then follow me. When Suchin said that, his heart sank. He had a really bad feeling. Not only your sect, but even your sworn brother Zong Shou cares about your safety. He told me to tell you that the Taishang is about to be in chaos, and it is best if you leave early. Chaos is about to be in chaos, and leave early. Jean Buhue muttered and was distracted. As expected, he is confident. Since he can unify Donglin in 2 years, then it shouldn't be difficult to defeat those 18 million troops. Then, he sighed and said apologetically, I am sorry, Senior Brother Su. I will be stubborn once more and still want to try. Let's see whether or not this Taishang can be saved. Zhongli listened on at the side and couldn't help but curse. Listening to the words of the two of them, it was like the Taishang was already in danger. However, in this world, it was just some unsettled people causing chaos. It wouldn't take long for the problem to be solved. How is it as exaggerated as the two of them? Suchin was startled, and then his face sunk down. A fine bird chooses a tree to nest in. Emperor Yuanshan betrayed you first. So why do you need to be buried with the Taishang? Even if you want to be an official, it would be better to go to Qian. 10 years of ups and downs. Suchin was a core person of the Kenzo sect, the future sect leader of the Hanzhan sect. Naturally, he knew that the entire Kenzo sect was prepared to rely on the Deqian. Although he didn't know the details, he guessed that the upper echelons of the Kenzo sect definitely had something to rely on. It was said that Horwa, who was the best at divination in the sect, destroyed his spiritual eye ability and lost decades of lifespan due to looking at Zhongshu's fate. From then on, he didn't come out. His good friend from the past must have had an indescribably noble fate. Who knows? Maybe he would be the ruler of this god continent in the future. I'm not doing this for the Taishang. I am doing this for the people of this world. Jean Buhue shook his head. If the Taishang is in chaos, who knows how many people in the central cloud continent will lose their homes? Who knows how many people will die in the chaos of war? Zhongshu is the ruler of Deqian, and he doesn't need to care. However, Jean Buhue has to care. He knew about Zhong Shaxin's character. As long as the country was safe, it was okay. What did the lives of the people of other countries have to do with him? Unless he took down the central cloud continent too. Suchin frowned and wanted to persuade him once more. However, with a thought, he hit his tracks. In just a few short moments, a group of cavalrymen dressed in bright clothes and riding on horses could be seen from the direction of the city gate, protecting dozens of carriages as they rushed out from the gate. Just as they passed by the prisoner carriages, the few people at the front suddenly stopped. Oh, isn't this the Censor Deputy Minister Jean Buhue? How did you become a prisoner? The one who spoke was a green-robed young master riding a lion-unicorn beast. At this moment, he was laughing coldly as he looked at the prisoner carriage. No, the previous censor deputy minister Jean Buhué was demoted to county magistrate 2 years ago. Today, he was stripped of his official status and is the same as a commoner. The moment he said those words, the curtains of the carriages were all pulled open. Inside, all of them were wearing grade 5 and above official robes, or were female family members of officials. So it is him, the one who wrote a letter to reduce the vassal towns and reform the imperial examinations. This person is so bold and preposterous. He actually wrote a letter to scold the ruler and scold Juzi. He said that the Qin government is clean and the country is strong. If our Taishang attacks, we will definitely lose. I heard that before he became an official, he was friends with the tyrant Zhongsho, which was why he tried to stop him. He ate the ruler's salary, but cared about personal relationships and didn't want to repay the ruler. Serves him right for falling to such a state. Jean Buhué was expressionless as he looked at all of them. He recognized many of them as they were officials of the same dynasty. The one who spoke was a disciple of the Yang family, one of the 5 big families of the Taishang. Because of him, the Yang family had tens of people who lost their positions, amongst which there were many important officials who hated him to the bone. Are you going out to enjoy the scenery? Jean Buhué shook his head slightly. The war in the south hasn't ended, and there are numerous refugees. You all actually have the mood to go out and play. How can our Taishang not lose? The moment he said that, everyone's expression changed. Shut up. This nonsense. Are you speaking for that Confucian enemy? What a disgrace. Scolding sound spread out. That green-robed young master laughed coldly. Our Taishang Yuanshan emperor is wise, leading tens of millions of troops to face the enemy with the pressure of Mount Tai. A small Qian can be wiped out with a flick of a finger. It probably won't be long before they return with a huge victory. Chapter 1076. Wise and valiant? That might not be the case. Jean Buhué shook his head disapprovingly. If he was wise and valiant, he wouldn't send troops at such a time. His Majesty is old, and Zhu Zi is a fool who only cares about the Confucian faction. The expressions of everyone present changed. They didn't expect that Jean Buhué would be so bold. What nonsense are you spouting? His Majesty has ruled for 100 years and turned the tides, allowing our Taishang to rise up. Who in the world isn't grateful? Is that something you could discuss? His Majesty is the saint ruler and can see thousands of miles. Saint ruler? Jean Buhué broke out into a laugh and looked outside the city at those numb refugees. Whether or not he is the saint ruler isn't something you can say. Is this what the saint ruler did? Clothes can't be warm and food can't be full. Is this considered ruling the world? That green-robed prince was still laughing coldly, his eyes filled with a teasing intent. So, in your eyes, His Majesty is a muddle-headed ruler. That the Qin army Zhongsho is the true, wise ruler? Jean Buhué was stunned and looked at this person. However, his eyes were filled with mocking intent. Was this a trap? They wanted to kill him. Jean Buhué? If he replied, then no matter if Emperor Yuanshan won or lost, he wouldn't be able to live. Even the Confucian faction wouldn't let him off. However, so what? What do you have to fear? Well, His Majesty was young. He might have been a valiant ruler. However, now he is old and muddle-headed, although the Daqian ruler ruled a barbarian land. However, in 10 years, the people got rich. He didn't pick up lost things on the road and didn't close his doors at night. Although he expanded 100 million miles, he didn't harm the people. He is a true ruler, a saint ruler descending. The people within the carriage were all in an uproar. Preposterous. A person who is prepared to burn books and destroy Confucianism to wipe out our Confucian faction. In your eyes, he is actually a ruler, a saint king? Where does he place my Confucian faction? Where does he place my Zhu Zi? This kid wrote a letter earlier, saying that the aristocratic families are too strong and have too many talents. Initially, he thought that he was a knowledgeable and upright gentleman Who would have thought that this person and Zhongsho are jackals of the same tribe? This Jin Buhui is crazy. Behead. Only by putting this person to death by 1,000 cuts will we be able to face the truth. No wonder Lord Weixin posted a few days ago that he wanted to expel him from the sect. How can such a person be worthy of joining my sect? Center of Ming's sect. Zhuxiantai really misjudged him. Jin Buhui was startled. So Weixin had already expelled him from a sect? Then, he couldn't help but laugh. Wasn't this expected? Ha ha ha. The ruler of the Qin country, Zhongsho, is an ancient hero. That green-robed young master laughed out loud, his eyes filled with pride. But the so-called hero you speak of is about to start a war in the southern border. He spent billions to build a Jochi ghost palace in the south of Min River. He searched for beauties from various races to fill up the palace, and even built that wine pool and meat forest. It was said that he had endless fun every day. He is just a barbaric ruler, and actually dares to compare to the ancient Saint Lake? Jochi Palace? Jin Buhui was stunned. Wine pool and meat forest, with that Zhongsho's personality, he would most probably do such a thing. However, that was definitely not possible. It was during a war to decide the rule of the cloud world. Speaking of which, was this a trap by Zhongsho? That fellow definitely wouldn't do such a boring thing. He was shocked. Jin Buhui wanted to get up, but was restricted by the chains. Only then did he realize that he wasn't that imperial censor deputy who could write a letter to the heavens. Moreover, even if he wrote a letter to the Taishang Emperor, it would take dozens of days. With Emperor Yuanxin's personality, he most probably wouldn't bother. What a joke. Jin Buhui laughed, but it was like he was crying. I will still say the same thing. If the Taishang wins this battle, then my eyes will be destroyed. If they win, then they will dig out my eyes. His voice was really sharp. At this moment, even the Yang surnamed young master was shocked. Then, like everyone else, he shook his head. This person had indeed gone mad. At dawn, Zhongsho woke up from his meditation. The god-refined sword was still floating in front of him, but it didn't have the sharp, killing intent from a few days ago. It didn't disappear, but it was retracted. What replaced it was an aura that suppressed one's life source. It was even more dangerous and hard to measure. In the end, he succeeded. He successfully turned the massacring sword intent into slaying. In this battle, the few End Realm experts were restricting one another, and it would be tough for them to interfere. They could only rely on both sides to win on the battlefield. To vent the killing intent in his heart, he could only rely on his sword path. Unfortunately, although this slaying sword intent was at late spirit realm, it was unable to merge the killing and slaying sword intent into one. Unfortunately, the god-refined sword had to merge into the sword formation and most probably couldn't be used. As for the second soul, the illusionary spirit one sword, it was in Chun Yueshuan's hands and hadn't been fully cultivated. At this moment, there wasn't enough time, and it seemed like he wouldn't be able to make any more progress. Things in the world were just like that. Nothing was perfect. Keeping the god-refined sword, Zhongsho saw Kong Yao in silver armor. She stood quietly beside him, looking at him in a daze. Samuraim's eyes lit up, and then he smiled. What are you looking at? Are you smitten with your husband? How shameless! Kong Yao came to her senses and scoffed. She said solemnly, an hour ago, the Taishang army arrived outside the palace. That Emperor Yuanshan is among them. Zhongsho sensed it long ago. An hour ago. This area was completely locked down by a spiritual formation that was set up at the last minute. A total of 19 Saint Realm experts had locked down this area of space. End Realm strength. Both sides weren't far apart. The Qian could barely go up against them. However, in terms of Saint Realm, Song Xingdao and the Kinzo sect were much weaker. This was even after the three factions each lost a few Saint Realm experts to use the 1,000-mile movement technique. If that wasn't the case, the three sects would only be stronger. This was also the reason why the Taishang and Confucian faction dared to come so far to surround and kill Zhongsho. Since End Realm and Saint Realm experts couldn't win, Then they would deal with those below. They would then use the absolute advantage of the Dao soldiers to surround and kill Zhongsho here. An hour later, be it the enemy or their side, they would have formed up. How many came? A full 800,000. Close to half of them are Dao soldiers, close to double our numbers. A weird expression flashed across Kong Yao's face. The number of Great Shang's troops was far greater than she had imagined. However, this also meant that if they won this battle, they could totally break the spine of the Taishang. Zhongsho sucked in a cold breath. 800,000, the three factions, and the Taishang really went all out. Just the Mind Stones consumed was enough for him to use the Book of Ian for 100 years. Luckily, the actual combat strength gap wasn't that far. Let's head out of the palace to take a look. At this moment, the Emperor was heading out, so it was too embarrassing to drive the sword alone. There was a ready-made imperial carriage in the palace, as well as a full set of ceremonial guards. It was still really extravagant. Who knows how much money Zhang Huai spent on it? The moment he walked out, he felt killing intent charge into the clouds. A full 1,000,000 people lined up here, giving off a majestic aura. Looking out, one could see vital energy gathering into a pillar and charging into heaven and earth. Zhongsho instinctively thought back to the Peng City battle with Xiangyu when he took in the Avici throne. The battlefield in front of him had an ancient aura that wasn't any weaker. The jade carriage hung 1,000 feet above the ground, and one could easily look down on the entire battlefield. The Shang army had 450,000 Dao soldiers, 250,000 yellow grade, and 200,000 Xian grade iron cavalry. The rest were all elites chosen from the Taishang border army. They were mostly grade 3 peak. At least 20% of them were grade 4 and above. The troops under him weren't much weaker, close to 200,000 Dao soldiers. The rest weren't any weaker than the enemy elites. Zhongsho looked out and was attracted by the thin left wing of his side. Only 30,000 Blood Cloud cavalry to go against the right wing. On the right, apart from the 65,000 Purple Qilin Flame Spear cavalry, there were close to 20,000 Xian grade iron cavalry from various aristocratic families. There were also 100,000 elite cavalry. They could be said to be 1 against 6. Zhong Yuan was holding a blood-colored halberd as he stood quietly in front of the army. He seemed to be able to go up against 10,000 alone. Zhongsho scratched his head and released the little puppy. The latter looked down with a lost expression. However, when it saw the 70,000 Xian Flame Golden Qilin beasts, its eyes squinted and disdain appeared in its eyes. Then, it didn't bother, jumping into Zhongsho's embrace like a puppy and licking his face. It smelled Zhongsho's scent, and its face was filled with enjoyment. Zhongsho was speechless and could only let it do as it wished. He felt weird. This puppy lived on the good energy of the world. Did he do something wrong? It caused a lot of good energy to gather in the king. Within the energy of the Dao, was it the battle with the Taishang? As expected, he was using the Dao to attack those who weren't, winning the hearts of the people. Thinking about that, he saw that the faces of the soldiers below were all filled with nervousness. They were all sneaking glances in the direction of the left wing, feeling uneasy, although they were barely able to maintain their calmness. Their eyes were filled with hesitation. Zhongsho instantly understood and knew that these people were worried that the left wing was too weak and would be crushed in one strike. Wouldn't need much strategic talent to be able to see that. Even the famous Blood Cloud cavalry couldn't be the opponent of 3 times their number of blood-grade Dao soldiers. If it wasn't for Kong Yao and his prestige, these people would have lost their fighting spirit. Zhongsho was stunned. He neglected this point before the battle. It seemed like it was best to use this trump card early. There were also people who turned their heads and looked at the vast palace. His brows were tightly furrowed, and his expression was one of disapproval. He was even a little pained. A portion of them looked at the majestic army opposite, fear appearing in their eyes. Zhongsho sighed and was a little worried. Is this because the army has no fighting spirit? Kong Yao shook her head. That is the only way. However, it might not be because they have no fighting spirit. Zhongsho didn't agree or disagree, continuing to look on. The right wing was the Moyang sword, 50,000 common people, mysterious dragon warriors, and 35,000 Moyang sword cavalry. They were the strongest, but they were led by a general that Zhong Shou didn't recognize. The middle army had 400,000 heavy armored elites. The one leading them was Ren Tianqing. Chapter 1077. It's him. Zhong Shou looked at the general on the left wing. Although this person was covered in armor, only his eyes were revealed. Zhong Shou could recognize that he was the commander of the 70,000 common people's vast habitat battle a few months ago. As not long after the battle, Zhong Shou left hurriedly. He didn't know his name. However, that day this person led 70,000 cavalry to crush the 50,000 Yuanshan blood cavalry of the Taishan guards, leaving a deep impression on him. Although he wasn't an unparalleled general talent like Zhong Yuan, he was a great cavalry general with a strong will. With this person here, he was better than anyone under him apart from Zhong Yuan and Ren Tianqing. She is a 7th-generation disciple of Yurtsang Xingdao. She is called Qin Yi. Her ability to lead cavalry is only weaker than Zhong Yuan. Unfortunately, she changed to cultivate Yurtsang Xingdao's source life spirit breathing technique. If she can't break through that stage, at most she can only reach the celestial realm. It was actually a girl? Zhong Shou looked towards Kong Yao in disbelief. He was stunned and then shook his head. In his heart, he felt that it was a waste. Although the source life spirit breathing technique gave the cultivator who had no choice but to cultivate a Dao soldier some hope, it was really small. Shaking his head, Zhong Shou looked elsewhere. Compared to the army formation in front of him, he paid more attention to the surrounding terrain. This is really a dead land. The plains here were the most fertile land in the south. In the future, Fallen Dragon City was one of the top 10 cities of the Cloud World. However, at this moment, it looked like it was connected in all directions, but it was filled with primeval forests and swamps. It couldn't allow an army to pass through. If they won, they would be fine, but if they lost, they couldn't even escape. The only safe path was the Nine-Dragon River behind the Juqi Palace. However, at this moment, all the Deqian cloud ships weren't here. Without ships, it was no different from a dead land. Moreover, after the Shang army formed up, they could directly reach the Min River. However, it could at most allow 4 carriages to travel side by side. Therefore, Zhong Shou felt that Kong Yao's strategy was too vicious. While Zhong Shou was overlooking the battlefield, opposite the Juqi Palace, on the huge imperial chariot, the Taishan Emperor Yuanshan Yin Yu was also looking across. Rest assured, Your Majesty, fellow Taoists, and I have already investigated the area, and aside from these 500,000 soldiers, there are no other hidden forces. Even Taiwan Taoist ancestor said that it was okay. Beside the throne, Immortal Yuntai was leisurely sipping his tea. His expression was calm and tranquil, as if he didn't care at all. However, the many generals and officials present all heaved a sigh of relief. The sudden appearance of Kong Yao and more than 100,000 Dao soldiers was truly shocking. They were worried that this was a trap. But since the cloud platform said so, there should be no other ambush. There shouldn't be any illusionary technique in this world that could escape the detection of more than 20 Saint Realm experts. Moreover, apart from that, there was also Taiwan Saint Venerable. It isn't surprising the Juqi Palace is such an important place and has tens of millions of stones of grain. It is normal that the defenses are tight. Before this, there were 300,000 elites defending here. That Kong Yao is an unparalleled commander in the world, so how would he not be prepared for this? Luckily, Commander Fei was careful and chose 800,000 elites. The atmosphere was really relaxed, and everyone had relaxed smiles on their faces. Zuiyin bowed towards Yin. From here, we can see that the enemy's morale is shaken. Congratulations, Your Majesty. We can expect to win this battle. Yinyu's face didn't show any joy. He was really calm. The more joyful or sad one was, the more one had to be reserved and not show it. The morale might not be shaken. The one who spoke was Fei Yin. This caused everyone to be stunned and come over. At this moment, they saw that opposite. Ren Tianxing suddenly held a sword and shield and rode out. Fellow comrades, behind us is the Nine-Dragon River. It is 37,000 feet wide, and there are numerous man-eating fishes in the water. Our Tian Cloud ships are 800 miles away. This is why if we don't win today, we will die. I wonder if everyone is willing to follow me, Ren Tianxing, to the Yellow Springs? All the Qian soldiers were stunned. Moments later, their expressions turned solemn. They held their swords and shields, giving out a loud explosion. We are willing to follow General Ren to the death. To the death. Yes, to the death. Ren Tianxing laughed out loud. What joy is there in life? What pain is there in death? If I lose today, I, Ren Tianxing, will die here. Ruler has ruled the country for 10 years, stabilizing combat strength and working hard to rule, which is why our Qian is so prosperous. We are Qian people when we are alive, and we will be Qian ghosts when we die. As long as ruler is here, we don't need to worry about the matters after we die. The moment he said that, even the last portion of soldiers whose morale was low changed, tossing aside all their worries. The Qian had been conquering for 10 years, and all the family members of those who died were able to be settled down. Every year, they could receive compensation and didn't need to worry about food and clothing. So what if they died here? As long as ruler was here, they didn't need to worry about the matters after they died. Looking opposite, Zui Yan's expression changed slightly. Ren Tianxing. This was one of the two famous generals of the Qian, cutting off all paths of retreat and fighting to the death. Fane laughed coldly. Unfortunately, Kong Yao isn't the Huayin Marquis, and I am not the Chang'an Lord. Huayin Marquis Han Xian was a famous general at the end of the Cloud Desolate era after Qin. He had once led thousands of troops to attack Zhao State and defeated the 200,000 elite soldiers of Zhao State in a desperate battle. The commander of the Zhao army was the Chang'an Lord. Your Majesty, our army came from afar, and if we don't win, we will die. Our morale is high, and we don't fear the enemy. In this battle, we can only see who is stronger and who is weaker. As Fane said that, he looked to the right at the 30,000 Blood Cloud cavalry. A gloomy look flashed across his eyes. What was Kong Yao trying to do? Could 30,000 Blood Cloud cavalry block 200,000 Blood Cloud cavalry? He felt that it was a little weird. Kong Yao was really careful when using troops, so why would she take such a risk? He looked to the left. Was she prepared to gather the elites to break through from the left wing? Your Majesty, please lead the right wing. Once we crush the Blood Cloud cavalry, we can directly attack the middle of the enemy formation and crush them in one strike. No matter what methods that woman had, he would be able to directly destroy them. He didn't believe that under the trampling of 200,000 cavalry, he couldn't wipe out this small 30,000 Blood Cloud cavalry. If Kong Yao was planning something, then she was really underestimating him. Inyu was also looking to the right. He frowned slightly and was also puzzled. A moment later, he nodded. That's good. We will have to rely on you for this battle. With a general taking charge, he could be at ease. With the experienced Fane leading these 200,000 cavalry, they would be able to crush the enemy in one strike. Fane cupped his fists and walked out of the carriage, riding his horse and leaving. At this moment, Zhong Xuan also stood up. Then I will take my leave. I still need to spend some effort on the altar over there. Inyu's expression changed. He stood up and reprimanded Zhong Xian. Imperial teacher, why do you have to do this? You can wait for a moment. Zhong Xuan smiled bitterly. The requirements of this technique are too strict and can't be delayed. Actually, Your Majesty doesn't need to worry. I am using this technique today to make up for my miscalculation. Most of the people present were stunned. Only Shui Lu and Yuntai looked at the back of the army in deep thought. A 10,000 feet wide altar was being swiftly formed under the carvings of close to 1,000 spirit cultivators. Apart from that, there were close to 3,000 kids in hemp clothing. Half male and half female, they stood within the altar with numb expressions. Is this the legendary Yin Yang Heart Needle Curse? Yuntai had a weird expression, Legend has it that when this curse is used, as long as the person doesn't reach end realm, no matter what their cultivation is, they will fall within 7 days. However, the person casting the technique will lose 1,000 years of lifespan. They will also be cursed by heaven and earth and have bad luck. There will be an unspeakable calamity. Curses and spells were different. They couldn't be used to kill, but they had many unimaginable abilities. It was a technique used by people who studied spells and was also envied by heaven and earth. Actually, 1,000 years of lifespan was just a base number. When this technique was used, the more noble the person was, the more it would consume. Whether or not his cultivation was profound was secondary. Apart from that, it also needed at least 1,000 boys and girls to be used as a blood sacrifice. It was extremely vicious. This was why even Saint Realm venerables didn't dare to offend those divination experts. If I can kill that person, I am willing to give up a mere 1 to 2,000 years of lifespan. His gaze was like ice as he looked at the luxurious carriage that Zhongshuo was in. Zhongshuan laughed coldly. However, it is also for myself. If I win this battle, I will be able to live for a while longer. 1 gain and 1 loss, I won't lose anything. As for that calamity, naturally, he could use the strength of the Taishan country to solve it. Lu Li was a Confucian and couldn't help but say, but these boys and girls, if the technique succeeded, these boys would have no chance of living and their essence blood would be sucked dry. He was halfway through when Zhongshuan interrupted him. They are mostly disciples of criminals. Their ancestors committed crimes, and their families should be wiped out. The remaining ones are barbarian race children. They hurt our Taishan soldiers and deserve to be wiped out. Using it here would be a worthy death. His Majesty will compensate their families and forgive them. So that is the case. Lu Li still couldn't let it go, but he forcefully suppressed it. At this moment, to the Confucian faction, killing the Confucian ruler was the most important thing. He was unhappy in his heart and said coldly, Cultivator Zhongshuan is willing to sacrifice yourself for justice. I respect that. I only hope that in the future, you can forget about the thousands of vengeful souls here. Zhongshuan smiled. Since he used this technique, he naturally didn't care about these 3,000 lives. Cultivators had to go up against the heavens and fight against the earth. Since when did he place a mere few thousand children in his eyes? Even Lu Li didn't really want to stop him, even though he said that. He was just a hypocrite. Zhongshuo has Kong Ruwei as the imperial astronomer to protect our country's fate. This technique might not succeed. Don't worry, this technique has been improved by me for thousands of years and is different from before. Unless that person is invulnerable to all evil. Just as he said that, he heard a loud explosion in the distance. Everyone looked over and saw that the 30,000 Blood Cloud cavalry on the right finally moved and slowly stepped forward. Along with this cavalry army moving, the entire Qian army moved forwards. Everyone was stunned. They were obviously at a disadvantage, but they still wanted to attack. Chapter 1078. Take the initiative to attack. That Kong Yao is a 1-in-a-million commander talent. His ability to lead troops can be seen in the previous battles. Why'd he do that? The right wing only has 30,000 blood cavalry. He will most probably crush them in one strike. Is he purposely trying to mislead us? I really don't understand. After Fein left, there were still generals who were good at military matters on the carriage. Looking at the wall like the Qian army that pressed over, they were totally confused and their faces were filled with doubt. Our Taishan is a little stronger. However, the enemy general is one of the unparalleled generals, Ren Tianxing. In a short time, they are on the same level. This is why the victory of this battle will be decided by the cavalry on the two wings. Taking the initiative to attack isn't appropriate. However, it will allow the 200,000 cavalry to charge forward and accumulate strength. That makes sense. The enemy has 500,000. However, the Qian army has 110,000 Qian grade cavalry. Are they using their strengths and avoiding their weaknesses? They have no choice, right? One can see Kong Yao's predicament. Our Taishan will definitely win this battle. While the generals were discussing, Zhong Xuan's gaze was cold like he was looking at a dead person. He looked at Zhong Shou one last time. He didn't stay any longer and walked towards Bukong behind the army. Shuelai pursed his lips and wanted to stop him. However, in the end, he didn't say a single word. Yuntai's lips curled up and he laughed coldly. He thought that this was good too. It was great that Zhong Xuan was willing to sacrifice his lifespan. In Yang Heart Needle technique, no matter if they won or lost, they would be able to totally wipe out that monster king. At this moment, Zhong Shou frowned. He used his world-burning blood eyes to look into the world river. The god-refined sword flew into the distance and instantly formed a connection with the other 6 swords nearby. Talismans wrapped around, and the sword formation was formed. It started to control the strength of heaven and earth. However, at the same time, a thick end-realm spiritual sense suppressed over. This aura was extremely familiar. It was none other than the sage of the Confucian sect, Zhu Zi, whom he had fought twice in a row. This time, he also used 3 end-realm god venerables to buff his body. Even if he faced the sword tip of the common people's sword formation, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage. At this moment, it was just entangling, locking down, and suppressing the entire sword artifact. Zhong Shou's attempt to use the sword formation to break the seal on this area was completely in vain. The outer realm river seemed calm at this moment, but undercurrents were surging. There were still dozens of end-realm spiritual senses intersecting and clashing with one another. They were evenly matched. Zhong Shou had the eyes of the burning world, so he could roughly recognize them. The 2 end-realm god venerables of the Buddhist faction Kenzo sect were all involved. In addition, there was one more person on Qing Xian's side. Demonic Lord Taishu. Zhong Shouxin was startled. This demon lord had been heavily injured by him. At this moment, he should have been far away from the cloud world to heal up. That day, he used the Imperial Path spiritual sense to attack his core. The 2 of them both cultivated the End Dao, which was why Zhong Shou understood his weaknesses the best. This demon ancestor's injuries were definitely heavier than what everyone thought. If he didn't heal up now, not only would his half a step to true realm be delayed, but he might even fall from the peak of End Realm. With how prideful this person was, he definitely wouldn't allow that to happen. So, it is an incarnation. Looking closely, the spiritual sense was 10 times weaker than during the common people's vast habitat battle. If this person really came over, then even Shouwan wouldn't be able to handle the situation. However, one could also see that this person's injuries were recovering really quickly. In just a few months, he had some extra strength to interfere in the cloud world once more. Zhong Shou shook his head. It seemed like he couldn't borrow strength from the End Realm and Saint Realm realms. The God-refined sword was the core of the sword formation to unify the other 6 swords. Luckily, before the battle, he knew about it and didn't have much hope. Apart from that, the Taoist, Confucian, and Demon factions had 19 Saint Realm venerables and 108 God Realm cultivators. At this moment, they each held a mark and stood in the 4 corners of the void. There were also at least 7 Saint Realm venerables protecting these venerables. Taoist faction's great cycle of heaven-locking space domain formation? No. Apart from that, there were also some Confucian and Demon faction methods mixed in. It caused this space barrier formation to be even more exquisite, and there was no chance to take advantage of it. Zhong Shaoxin instantly comprehended that it was able to combine the spells of the Taoist and Demon faction. Only End-Realm cultivators could do that. This formation was most probably deduced by Qing Xian, Tai Wang, Wushang Yuan Demon, and even the heavily injured Taishu. They really thought highly of him. It is most probably that demon-sealing, heaven-locking formation. It was the legacy of the Demon Path that was no weaker than the Taoist faction's great cycle of heaven-locking space domain formation. Using the strengths of these 2 formations, it was even comparable to the common people's vast habitat's 10,000 celestial formation. However, as it was set up at the last minute, it was slightly weaker. Zhongsho tried to burn it with a world-burning flame, but after a few minutes, he was still unable to shake it at all. Ruler is really knowledgeable. This formation is known as the Great Cycle of Heaven-Locking Space, Domain Demon Sealing Formation. It was specially set up by the three Saint Venerables for Ruler. A dark and sharp voice suddenly rang out in Zhongsho's ears. So if you want to escape, then forget about it. Zhongsho's brow rose up. Although he was muttering to himself, he used true qi to cover his voice. Only a few people around him could hear it. However, this person could hear it? Was it Taisher who had the 6 ears ability? He felt that it wasn't right. He was familiar with this voice, but his intent was far weaker than Taisher's. Even Taisher's incarnation. It was far weaker. Looking in the direction of the voice, they saw a pale, delicate, and handsome youth with no signs of life appearing in the air 200,000 feet away. His face was filled with a mocking expression. 2 months ago, I said that Ruler would fall soon. As expected, it came true today. I specially came here to witness Ruler's defeat. He laughed sinisterly. Ruler should be praying that you don't fall into the hands of my demon sect. At that time, you won't be able to live and won't be able to die. Blood Saint Demon Lord Xiaohuanshan. Zhongsho's eyes opened wide. The killing intent and rage that had been building up in his chest instantly spat out like a volcano erupting. His eyes were blood red, but the last moment, he suppressed his urge to attack. He was unable to use the God Refined Sword, so Zhongsho changed to an intermediate celestial weapon. However, that sword handle was nearly crushed by Zhongsho. That killing intent was unable to be vented out, so he could only inject it all into this backup sword artifact. It caused the purple gold sword sheath to be unable to take it, cracks appearing, and it nearly shattered. Zhongsho was too lazy to speak to this blood Saint Demon Lord. After this battle was decided, it would be time for him to settle the blood debt with the Demon Path sects. The army of 500,000 slowly pressed forward. The 30,000 Blood Cloud cavalry on the left started to speed up. The sound of the hooves of the 100,000 horses was like thunder. The Shang army opposite them also started to move. Shouts rose up from all around the formation. Slay the demon! Slay the demon! Today our Taishang will definitely win. His Majesty has ordered that the first person to break the enemy formation will be the Marquis. The person who kills Zhongsho will be given the title of king. Under the orders of the saint, we will act on behalf of the heavens to suppress this ruler. Kill! The 400,000 cavalry on both sides of the ruler of Shang started to speed up. In just a few breaths, they were close to their maximum speed. The 10 miles of distance between the two armies was shortened in just a few breaths. The little puppy in Zhongsho's embrace also felt the impending collision and walked out of Zhongsho's embrace. Its body was slightly prostrating like a wild beast that was about to pounce. Its face was vicious as it roared out. Zhongsho saw that Kong Yao was in a daze and couldn't help but laugh. Little Yao, what are you thinking about? The battle has already begun. As the commander, you shouldn't be distracted at such a time. Kong Yao came back to her senses when she heard that and said calmly, I am thinking about that Shuriwe. Who knows when he will attack and what methods he will use to turn the situation around. I wonder if the arrangements this concubine made in advance will be able to stop him. When she spoke, her tone was filled with uncertainty. She had never fought with Shuriwe before. When she was in Taishang, she only roughly knew about his ability. She didn't know much about the strength of the Shur family and Shuriwe's methods, which was why she had no confidence. Suddenly, her heart moved. From the corner of her eyes, she saw a person looking at her with eagle-like sharp eyes. It was the Great Shang's southern conquering great general, Fei Yin, who was holding a huge blade and galloping in front of the 65,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry on the left wing. At this moment, his eyes were 30% provocation, 30% pity, 30% mocking, and also a bit of greed and admiration. Kong Yao was startled. She retracted her gaze and was too lazy to look. She didn't know why her superior was in the left-wing army, and it had nothing to do with her. The numerous battles at Min River caused Fayin to be covered in dirt. She had already vented her anger. Whether this person lived or died had nothing to do with her. Anyways, they didn't have much of a relationship. After being comrades for so many years, all that was left was hatred and unfamiliarity. At this moment, Zongsho was also exchanging glances with someone. Those were the gazes that were cast over from the simple and unadorned imperial chariot opposite. One of them was the Taishang Yuanshan Emperor Inyu. He could ignore the rest. Only the Saint Realm experts on the carriage could enter his eyes. Although he didn't directly speak, he could see what they were thinking about from their gazes. What a Juchi palace! So luxurious. This kid is no longer a threat. We can win today. Stupid ruler. Enemy of the Confucians. If you don't die, where is the justice in the world? Our Taoist faction is a huge enemy. Even if we can't personally kill him, we can't let him escape. Zongsho smiled and looked at them calmly. At this moment, he felt as if he had the ability to read their minds. He could sense all their thoughts. He felt slightly weird. Why wasn't Zhongshuan here? Also, who knows what the Taishang was doing behind the formation? The 30,000 blood cloud cavalry slowly accelerated to the max, like an arrow piercing forwards. Just at this moment, Xiaori suddenly stood up. His entire body was filled with the might of a king, and at the same time, he gave a low roar that spread throughout the battlefield. To be continued. Chapter 1079. Bitch! When Kong Yao shifted her gaze away, Fane's heart was filled with rage. He had imagined that this subordinate of his would regret and feel despair. He also guessed that this woman would still be filled with fighting spirit and would fight to the death. However, he didn't expect that this woman would totally disregard him. There was nothing more infuriating than that indifferent and emotionless gaze just now. However, as a general, the most important thing to maintain was calmness. Fain had commanded troops for decades and had been through hundreds of battles. At this moment, even if rage attacked his heart, he still suppressed it. A few orders caused the entire cavalry formation to change. The center still had him as the sharp point of the entire army as they charged forwards. On the right, an arrow also stretched out, giving off an extremely sharp aura. The 200,000 cavalry was like an arm to him. With his prestige from leading troops to conquer the north for decades, even the arrogant and untamed Taoist Purple Chelan Flame Spear cavalry was willing to submit to him. The moment they were unable to crush the Blood Cloud cavalry right away, the right arrow would stab in diagonally and into the waist of the enemy formation. Then, with 6 times the number of troops, they would totally crush the 30,000 Blood Cloud cavalry. After which the entire middle of the Great Gon army would be exposed in front of his eyes. He originally wanted to speak for this woman after the battle, but thinking about it now, it was best if he didn't. Just a few small victories and she was actually so arrogant. If she became a general in Taishang, it might not be a blessing for the country. Killing intent rose up in his heart, but he slowly retracted the random thoughts in his mind. He didn't even blink as he focused on the blood-colored cavalry formation. Although there were only 30,000 cavalry, the one leading them was one of the 2 heroes of Donggon, Zhong Yuan, who was known as the unparalleled cavalry general. The ability of the cavalry to charge was said to be the best in the world. Although they were at a disadvantage, they might have some unexpected moves. They got closer and closer, but the cavalry army didn't change. They were still like an arrow, a wall pressing over. The blood-red armor reflected a cold glow, and even their gazes seemed to be able to freeze people. As expected from the Blood Cloud cavalry, even when facing an enemy 6 times their number, they didn't waver. It was said that the Blood Cavalry Kill Heart Sutra could control one's heart. Imperceptibly, it could make all the knights loyal to the king. Even if they were asked to throw their lives away, they would not hesitate. They were the most terrifying cavalry army among the Xian Grey Dao soldiers. Looking at it today, it was indeed so. However, that was all there was to it. Under the trampling of 200,000 iron cavalry, No matter what kind of Tao soldier it was, it would be crushed into pieces before the hooves of his horses. Kong Yao, oh Kong Yao, back then, I misjudged you. But today, I'll completely shatter the foundation of your arrogance. The sound of iron hooves galloping was less than 20 feet away. Suddenly, Fane heard a strange beast roar. His voice was filled with majesty. His voice was low, but it was incomparably domineering. Fane did not mind. At this moment, the most important thing for the army was to be distracted. He could also sense that at this moment, countless gazes were looking over, anticipating the result of this collision. There were even dozens of powerful wills in the outer realm river that were focused on them. Zhong Yuan, who had been silently galloping on his horse, finally moved. The dragon-horned winged horse under him suddenly sped up, the blood-colored halberd raised up. His entire body was covered in a blood mist and purple lightning. A cold voice spread throughout the battlefield. "Brothers, please follow me, Zhong Yuan, to trample the army." The 30,000 Blood Cloud cavalry were silent and did not reply. However, at the same time, they all raised their horse speed and their aura rose. 120,000 iron hooves trampled on the ground, like a blood-colored iron current that nothing could stop. Trampling the army? What shameless words! Fane laughed coldly, raising his blade and starting to gather the strength of the entire army. A person who used troops had to be good at using strength. Naturally, he couldn't compare to Zhong Yuan in terms of strength, but the strength of the army he grasped was several times stronger than Zhong Yuan's. But in the next moment, the expression on his face froze. He only felt that the entire army behind him was collapsing at a shocking speed. Numerous exclamations and furious shouts spread out, amongst which were the cries of the Xian Flame Golden Qilin beasts, filled with unease and fear. Fane turned around and looked, only to see that the 65,000 purple Qilin Flame Spear cavalry were in a complete mess. Tens of thousands of Xian Flame Golden Qilin beasts either suddenly stopped and turned around, went berserk and smashed about, or directly knelt down, their bodies trembling. The orderly formation was now in a mess. That purple Qilin cavalry formation that shocked the world naturally collapsed. What is going on? How did this happen? Fane was filled with fear, his eyes filled with shock. However, this was the last thought in his mind. A blood-colored cavalry shadow appeared in front of him. It was Zhong Yuan. The blood-red halberd waved down, the vast and unstoppable strength directly smashing his body and the cavalry under him into pieces. Following which, the 30,000 Blood Cloud cavalry were like a flood as they smashed into the enemy formation. Where the iron hooves passed, blood and flesh scattered. All the Taoist faction Purple Qilin Flame Spear cavalry and those Xian Flame Golden Qilin beasts all had their bodies torn apart. They turned into a blood essence mist and were sucked into the blood cavalry formation. The thick blood mist spread out. In just a dozen breaths, it had spread 10 miles. Kuang Lang. Everyone on the large imperial carriage was dead silent. Only when the teacup broke did they come back to their senses. Inu suddenly got up, his face ashen as he looked to the right. His eyes were filled with disbelief. General Fane, whom he regarded as one of his right-hand men, had died in battle just like that? The Purple Qilin Flame Spear cavalry, who is said to be one of the strongest Xian Grey Dao soldiers in the Cloud World, collapsed just like that? What the hell is going on? How is that possible? Commander Fane and the Purple Qilin Flame Spear cavalry lost so easily? Zhong Shou must have used some demonic technique. The Taoist faction has nurtured these Xian Flame Golden Qilin beasts for 10,000 years and improved them dozens of times. They are naturally warlike and tame. Even if a god beast is in front of them, they won't fear it. They are pretty much perfect. Why would something happen at such a time? It seems like they are afraid of something. What is it to cause those Xian Flame Golden Qilin beasts to lose control? Yintai was filled with rage and anxiousness. The calmness and calmness from before were all gone. Just now, he was the one who crushed the teacup in his hand. Losing control of their mounts, Those tens of thousands of purple Chelan flame spear cavalry were trapped on the battlefield. Even if they wanted to escape, they couldn't. Wherever the 30,000 blood cloud cavalry pointed their spears at, everything was swept away. Pretty much every breath that passed, hundreds of purple Chelan flame spear cavalry would die under the halberds of the blood cloud cavalry. He spread out his spiritual sense, and with just a slight look, he noticed the suppressive power that covered the battlefield. The source was the jade carriage opposite them. Demon, what demonic technique did you use to harm our Chelan Dao soldiers? He stretched out his hand, and a huge 5-color mountain came crashing down on the other side. Zhongsho's eyes flashed. The sword in his hand suddenly came out of its sheath by half an inch. However, at that moment, a blood-colored blade light rose up from beside him and ripped open the sky. It was Chu Shui who was controlling the Blood Moon blade. With just one strike, she broke the giant mountain. That 5-colored giant mountain scattered and then reformed. It instantly turned into a sword and slashed towards Chu Shui. Taoist faction 5-element origin energy. Zhongsho couldn't help but scoff. So this Yuntai was the same as Chu Shui, cultivating the 5-element Dao confirming technique. Although Chu Shui's cultivation was weak, using the Blood Moon blade, she could barely go up against him. The sword wasn't sheathed. The vengeful energy was gathering more and more. Zhongsho could feel waves after waves of extremely vast king energy being injected over from the Avicii throne. The power that he could grasp using King Path martial arts was crazily increasing. It should be due to the change in the situation. This was also the moment that he had been looking forward to the most. The collapse of the 65,000 purple Chelan flame spear cavalry caused the fate of the Deqian country to rise at that moment. Naturally, the King Path energy would also increase. After being blocked by Chu Shui's Blood Moon blade, Yuntai instantly tossed out a giant whip. It turned into 100,000 feet and smashed towards the blood-colored mist below. He knew that if he delayed for even a moment, more Taoist faction Dao soldiers would die. Yuntai didn't bother to search for the truth, not hesitating at all as he used all his celestial treasures. I'm afraid that Yuntai alone won't be enough. Fellow Daoist Shui Zhai, please help me. Lu Li's face was ashen white. He didn't hesitate and nodded his head. Taoist and Confucian factions are on the same side, so we will try our best. Kill this demon lord. If the 60,000 Taoist faction cavalry were defeated, then their plan to kill the demon lord today would be for naught, and they would be in danger of losing. He raised his hand and tossed out a jade stone. It brought with it millions of auspicious clouds as it smashed towards the tip of the blood mist like a shooting star. Another scripture filled with words flew into the air. After it dissolved, it formed tens of thousands of protect words in the air and landed towards the tens of thousands of purple Chelan flame spear cavalry. Zhongsho looked on and shook his head. Did the two of them treat him as a dead person? At this moment, he felt a chill cover his entire body. His heart felt a slight stabbing pain, and the red jade necklace in front of his chest gave out an unnatural red glow. However, all of a sudden, Zhongsho didn't have time to bother about it. His mind was calm, and at that moment he slashed out with his sword. The killing intent and vengeful energy that had accumulated for several months could finally be vented out from the sword. The moment the sword came out of the sheath, it was filled with energy all around. An unparalleled killing intent spread through the air. Slaying. The faintly discernible sword light had already crossed dozens of miles of the battlefield in an instant. Yuntai was shocked and didn't hesitate to retract the black iron whip. The 5-colored energy formed into a shield in front of him. Shuai didn't bother about anything else. The tens of thousands of protect word talismans were instantly recalled. They formed into a light barrier that covered his body. The giant stone also hung in front of him. Blood Saint Demon Lord's expression changed. Just as he was about to help, a person flashed beside Zhongsho. It was A.O. Kuan. He could only helplessly stop. He could only look on as the sharp sword light pierced through the shield, easily avoiding the iron whip and piercing Yuntai's throat. Zhongshu's eyes were cold and cold. Months of hard work to slay was all for this sword today. Chapter 1080. The sword light twisted at Yuntai Jinren's throat and completely cut off his head. However, his body also turned into an illusory fog in an instant and disappeared without a trace. Only a broken talisman paper fell to the ground. Yuntai's body appeared 30 feet away. However, there was a wound at his throat. His face was ashen white as he looked forwards in fear. Just now, it was a hair's breadth away. Just an instant more, and he would have died. However, even now it wasn't easy. A weird sword energy charged into his body. It struck at his life essence energy, causing his true essence to shatter and collapse. The chakra meridians in his body were breaking apart inch by inch. 90% of his Tao strength had to be used to block this sword energy, so that he wouldn't be on the verge of death. This sword intent was slaying. It was above the massacring sword intent, and had reached the late stages of the sword intent spirit realm. What a strong sword technique. Such a sword path, such a strong king path martial arts. Even if he and Yuntai worked together, they might not be able to block it. He looked towards the right and saw blood light stabbing into his eyes. In just that moment of delay, only a small portion of the 65,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry was left. As for the blood mist, it spread out a few more miles. The intense pain in his chest was unbearable. Along with his injuries, Yuntai spat out a mouthful of blood. At this moment, Inu also felt his hands and feet turn cold as he looked forwards with a stunned expression. If it wasn't for the blood that Yuntai splattered out and the stench assailing his nose, he would have doubted whether or not he was dreaming. We only lost 60,000 Xian Grey Dao soldiers. Our Taishang still has 700,000 troops. We still have a chance. Only the purple Qilin flame spear cavalry were affected. The right wing still has 100,000 iron cavalry and 20,000 Xian Grey Dao soldiers. Chance my ass. The blood cloud cavalry absorbed the essence blood of a full 66,000 grade, 6 experts. Same Grey Dao soldiers. Even if it was 2-1, it would be tough for them to win. Not to mention the motley crew put together by various aristocratic families. Block for as long as we can. We can only hope that our Taishang's central army will be able to break through the enemy's right wing first. However, it seemed to prove the words of that person. When the blood mist spread out 20 miles, the aura of the blood cloud cavalry was unstoppable. The 30,000 blood halberds were harvesting lives like the Grim Reaper. The 20,000 profound-ranked Dao soldiers were still fine. They could barely resist the invasion of the blood mist. As for the 100,000 Taishang cavalry behind them, most of them were only at the peak of grade 3. After being entangled by the blood mist, the mounts under them would usually be gradually exhausted within a few dozen breaths. His speed was greatly reduced, and he couldn't even turn around to escape. They were drowned by the surging scarlet tide, trampled, shattered into blood powder. After easily destroying the 200,000 cavalry on the right wing of the Taishang, the 30,000 blood cavalry were not tired at all. Not only was he not tired, he was even more excited. Thanks to the recovery of his blood qi, his physical strength and jinqi were stronger than before the battle, and his fighting spirit was at its peak. Under the leadership of Zhong Yuan, the entire cavalry formation completed a beautiful turn and started to charge towards the waist of the Taishang Central Army. The invincible name of the Blood Cloud Cavalry was forged from numerous blood and battle records. As long as there was blood energy to absorb and living beings to kill, then they would never run out of energy. This is pretty much an evil demon. On the carriage pulled by the 49 dragon horses, Zhuaxin's body trembled, his face turning purple gold. As expected from a demon, Monster Lord, how is such a cavalry different from an evil demon? Everyone didn't say a word, silently looking forward. At that moment, an illusory figure of a Buddha descended. The Buddha light shone, and the 100,000 soldiers at the front of the Qin Central Army were covered in a layer of golden light. With some knowledge, one would know that this was the Buddhist faction protector monk soldier who had chanted the Diamond King Will mantra. It buffed the De Qian army with the diamond body. At this moment, even if one didn't know much about troops, one would know that there were 200,000 Huang Grey Dao soldiers in the middle. No matter what, they wouldn't be able to crush the middle formation of the Great Gan army in just a short moment. The situation changed. Just now, they thought that victory was within their grasp. But now, they were in a desperate situation. Was the Taishang really going to lose today? Coincidentally, at this moment, a golden light shone in the air. 3 miles out, the blue sky was sliced open, and one could see hundreds of people crossing in. Oh, these are the Taoist faction true martial swordsmen. 142 people. These are 3 sets of the Great Beidou true martial sword formation. At this moment, the officials and generals in front of Yin, you seem to have grabbed onto a life-saving straw, their spirits rising. That's right. Apart from the purple Qilin flame spear cavalry, the Taoist faction still had thousands of heaven and earth Grey Dao soldiers. This battle was far from being in a desperate situation. Yuntai wasn't optimistic. During the Common People's Path Vast Habitat battle, the Taoist faction lost the most true martial swordsmen, as well as the various heaven and earth Grey Dao soldiers. At that time, less than 10% of the people who followed the few end realms to charge into the Common People's Path Vast Habitat survived. Although the Taoist faction bought thousands of slaves a few years ago, they had lost all of them. After that battle, the high Grey Dao soldiers between the 6 factions of the Cloud World regained balance. This was why the entire Taoist faction didn't place their hopes on those heaven Grey Dao soldiers. They just needed to restrict one another. At this moment, with these 3 Great Beidou true martial sword formations entering, it also meant that the situation outside of the void would be even more tense. Song Xingdao and the Kinzo sect Buddhist faction would definitely try their best to suppress and counterattack. He looked opposite, only to see that behind Zhongshuo's carriage, there were also 72 celestial realm cultivators who slowly rose into the air. Their auras were similar to the sword intent that Zhongshuo used just now. Source Ocean Demon Slaying Warriors. Yuntai's pupils constricted. He had heard about the battle that wiped out the 9 capital celestial dynasty. The bunch of Source Ocean Demon Slaying Warriors under Zhongshuo were famous because of that. As expected, what Shirulin brought back to the Cloud World definitely wasn't just the 15 Earth-grade spaceships. 72 Source Ocean Demon Slaying Warriors. Even if their combat strength wasn't as exaggerated as the rumors said, it was enough to restrict 3 Great Beidou true martial sword formations. His gaze turned towards the back of the carriage. Your Majesty, may I ask how long Grand Teacher Zhongshuan's Yin-Yang Heart Needle technique will take to complete? Even if he lost today, he had to wipe out that bloodsore monster lord. Yin Yu's eyes flashed, and he was expressionless. 49 days ago, Grand Teacher had already started to prepare. He would complete it at 9:30. He was a ruler who had been through numerous storms. Even in such a dangerous situation, he still calmed down and showed the demeanor of a wise ruler. Luli looked at him with praise in his eyes. He wasn't arrogant in victory and wasn't discouraged in defeat. As expected from the ruler of the Taishang. Your Majesty, there is no need to worry. This evil ruler has gone against the law and will face the wrath of the heavens sooner or later. The heavens will protect the Taishang for a long time. Yuntai listened at the side while looking at the sky. He laughed coldly. If they retreated today, the entire Cloud World would fall into the hands of that demon. Wrath of the heavens? Why not rely on those alien races? However, 7:30? Looking at the time, it was already past 9:30. Just a little more time, and Zhongshuan's Yin-Yang Heart Needle curse would be completed. There was still a chance. Less than 10 minutes was enough for that curse to be completed. However, in the next moment, a thought suddenly came from outside the void realm into his sea of consciousness. Yuntai was stunned, his entire body petrified. A moment later, he felt that it was preposterous. How was that possible? That person alone killed hundreds of thousands of Taoist faction disciples, and committed a huge sin. He was also rejected by the entire Confucian faction and was seen as the enemy of the Confucians. How could that person be? Yintai raised his head and looked at the opposite side. He saw that Luli's expression was even more shocked, as if he had seen a ghost. There was even a hint of panic on his face. How is that possible? How can a desolate ruler compare to an ancient saint? In front of the Juqi Palace, on the imperial carriage, Zhongsho sat on the throne, his brows tightly furrowed. Yintai escaping at the last moment wasn't out of his expectations. The Taoist faction's substitute talisman had always been really famous, especially the talismans that the two End Realm made. They could substitute one's life and death. Seeing that the two of them didn't interfere, Zhongsho also stopped and sheathed his sword. He wasn't in a rush as he had made up his mind. Today, within 100 miles of the Wine Palace, no one above Spirit Realm could escape from his sword. Even Saint Realm experts were no exception. What he paid more attention to was the weird situation in his body, which made him wary, but also confused. At this moment, for some reason, the cold feeling in his body became stronger and stronger. The piercing pain in his heart was even more obvious. The red jade necklace in front of his chest gave out a crisp cracking sound. Cracks began to appear on it, as if it would shatter at the slightest touch. At the same time, more red light began to appear. Kong Yao sensed it right away. When she turned around, her eyes were filled with shock. After all, she came from a Kong family and saw some clues. He seems to have been hit by a forbidden technique. The aura is really evil and can directly attack one's heart. Unfortunately, she had destroyed her heaven eye, and her intuition on the battlefield was really sharp. However, she was unable to see through Zhongsho. Shari also seemed to have sensed something. He lowered his body again and roared angrily in the direction of the Shang Lord. Not only did its body start to swell, but many purple-gold scales appeared. The aura of a god-beast king slowly spread out. What was weird was that along with Xiaori's furious roar, the cold and yin power in Zhongsho's body dissipated by a large amount. Even the piercing pain in his chest slowly faded, and he didn't feel it at all. Curse? Is it Zhongshuan? Zhongsho's expression was really ugly. The curse of a divination master wasn't something to joke about. However, didn't such curses need a person's 8 characters and even hair and flesh? I'm not sure about that. I only know that this curse is really evil and needs large amounts of blood spirit souls. Kong Yao shook her head and didn't care, continuing to pay attention to the battle ahead. However, at the corner of her eyes, she saw that Zhongsho's face was ashen white. She couldn't help but burst out laughing. What are you afraid of? Although Kong Yao didn't know what technique it was, anyone with a tough fate wouldn't be able to withstand it. For example, that Xiang King and Ranwu King. Their bodies were filled with vengeful energy which made it hard for evil to invade. You, Zhongsho, are about the same. Chapter 1081. In the outer region void, at a place far away from the cloud world, a few people stood solemnly there with different expressions on their faces. Xiaoguan was here alone, facing Qing Xian, Tai Wang, as well as the Taisher Demon Lord's clone. However, each of his actions was really calm. On the contrary, Qing Xian's expression was really ugly. To say that his heart and lungs were pierced was not an exaggeration. A full 65,000 protector Dao soldiers were wiped out in front of his eyes. Such a feeling wasn't good. If one said that the battle in the common people's path vast habitat, the Taoist faction only suffered a small loss. Although Kunming died, he could still revive. If that was the case, then today's battle on the God-Falling Plains would be a real loss. Qilin King accompanying him. Speaking of which, is this Zhongsho the Saint King alive? When he chose the Xian Grade Golden Flame Qilin Beast as the mount of the Xian Grade Dao soldiers, he predicted that after the 3 ancient emperors, there wouldn't be any more Qilins, and there wouldn't be any more Saint Emperors. However, 12,000 years later, the scenes in front of them were like a heavy slap to their faces. It was really strong, such that they were at a loss and didn't know what to do. They still didn't understand. That Zhongsho was so preposterous and killed so many people. So how could he be the saint ruler? Although Tai Huang didn't speak, his eyes were filled with bitterness. Other people didn't recognize it, but the moment those tens of thousands of Xian Flame Golden Qilin beasts lost control, he recognized that it was the aura of the Qilin King. Qilins were auspicious beasts, born from eating good energy in the world. They had unlimited abilities, but it was really tough for them to grow. Only by accompanying the Saint Ruler and absorbing the Saint King energy could they grow into a Qilin King beast. He finally understood. When Rongbi was about to die, he looked at Zhongsho's luck and fortune. He said that this kid was a huge calamity for the Taoist faction, and in the end, he even said the word Qi. So, it wasn't referring to the common people's path battle, but today. The last word was most probably referring to that Qilin King. The only thing that the hundreds of thousands of Xian Flame Golden Qilin beasts feared. Reverend Huarao of the Kenzo sect used his divine ability to look at Zhongsho's fate a month ago. However, in just an instant, his spiritual eye was destroyed. Blood flowed from his 7 orifices, and he lost close to half of his lifespan. Shoguan isn't proficient in algebra, but since Zhongsho can get a Qilin to follow him, that's most likely the case. Shoguan seemed to see through their thoughts. He looked at the inner realm and smiled. Fellow cultivator Qing Xian, are you going to leave? Why don't you wait for a while until the outcome is decided? The two people in front of him were already carefully trying to leave this space and withdraw from the battle of wills. Qing Xian's face was even more livid. He stared at Shoguan with unfathomable eyes. As the saint ruler of the world, Song Xingdao and the Kenzo sect probably knew that Zhongsho had a Qilin by his side. However, they kept it from him and tried their best to cover up for Zhongsho. The scheme of the two sects could be seen from today's events. It was truly sinister. Although he was furious, there was nothing he could do. Since he could plot against Song Xingdao, then naturally, Shoguan could plot against the Taoist sect too. The Taoist sect suffered heavy losses today. Apart from the huge change when Sibei Taoist Lord left, this was the heaviest loss they had suffered in the past 16,000 years. Even someone as shrewd as him found it hard to remain calm. The pain and rage in his heart were just a few threads that scattered into the void. It caused many spiritual explosions in the surrounding space. However, at this moment, he could only suppress the anger in his chest. Fellow cultivator Shoguan must be joking. The outcome of today has been decided. So what can we do if we don't leave? Do we stay here and see if fellow cultivator Shoguan is happy? Along with the right wing of the Shang ruler collapsing, the outcome of the battle was obvious. Zhongshuan's yin-yang heart needle technique was worth looking forward to. However, since Zhongsho had the body of a saint king, then naturally he was invulnerable to all evil. The forbidden technique was terrifying, but in the cloud world, when did the founding emperors of the dynasties fear it? Even some generals with heavy vengeful energy didn't care. Much less Zhongsho, who was the saint ruler of the world. The Zhongshuan technique was just a joke. I really do have such intentions. I am really happy and want to find someone to share it with. Shoguan was delighted and laughed out loud. It wasn't because he was delighted, but because thousands of years of anger and hatred were suppressed. Today, he was finally able to vent it all out. If the two of you want to leave, then go ahead. Shoguan won't stop you, but that is a little unkind. Just as he spoke, Wushang Yuan demon Li Bieshua's body appeared. His expression wasn't good, and his eyes were dark and cold. Qing Xian cultivator, since our 3 factions are working together, then naturally we should advance and retreat together. There was another meaning in his words, but everyone present knew that he was here for the tens of thousands of Heaven Demon War Cavalry and the Yuanshi Demon Sect's Yuanshi Demon Spirit Cavalry. Although the Taoist factions, Xian Grey Dao soldiers were all wiped out. However, the tens of thousands of Demon Path Demon Cavalry were still perfectly fine. However, once Qing Xian and Tai Wang left with the Taoist faction, then these tens of thousands of Demon Path Dao soldiers wouldn't be able to survive. Only now did they know how vicious Kong Yao's plan was. There was only one path nearby that could safely leave the god-falling plains. As for the 600,000 troops of the Cloud World, less than 1% of them would be able to leave safely. Qing Xian didn't speak, but his eyes were filled with a cold intent. Advance and retreat together? Did they have to wait for the Heaven Demon War cavalry to escape from the gone army? If they delayed, the hundreds of Taoist faction true martial swordsmen wouldn't be able to escape. There was no reason to sacrifice the last bit of Taoist faction resources for the lives of the Demon Path people. Since the Purple Qilin Flame Spear cavalry was wiped out, then the Heaven Demon War cavalry would also die on the battlefield. That was something that they would love to see. If not, how would they control them in the future? If the Demon Path tossed aside their grievances with Song Xingdao and attacked the mid-plains, how would they block them? However, after all, there was an alliance agreement, and he couldn't voice out such thoughts. Li Bieshue, our three factions have an alliance agreement? Why haven't I heard of it before? To lose the big for the small, isn't that hurting those close to you and making the enemy happy? The one who spoke wasn't Yuan Shi and Tai Wang, but Zhu Shi who was crossing the air. Qing Xian looked over, but he couldn't help but feel pity for him. Although the Taoist faction suffered heavy losses this time, after all, their foundations were still there. However, although the Confucian faction didn't seem to suffer heavy losses, it was actually much worse than the Taoist faction. The entire Confucian faction saw them as violent, and they even told the world that they were the enemy of the Confucian faction, someone that everyone could kill. However, he was a saint ruler who was on the same level as the three ancient emperors that the Confucian faction worshipped. Naturally, it was a huge blow to the Confucian faction. If it was more serious, it could even be seen as the Cloud World and the heavens rejecting the Confucian faction and not recognizing their path. To Zhu Zi, it wasn't too much to say that he had lost all his prestige. Looking out, he saw that Zhu Zi's expression was a little dazed. He was suddenly lost, suddenly furious, suddenly confused, like he was showing signs of turning into a demon. However, there was still some clarity in his eyes as he bowed towards Qing Xian. I will leave the matters of the world to Brother Qing Xian. Qing Xian's face turned solemn as he nodded his head. This matter concerns the survival of our Taoist faction, so Qing Xian will naturally try his best. However, Zhu Zi, have you made your decision? Zhu Zi's face was numb as he nodded his head slightly. What else could he do? After knowing that Zhong Shou was the saint ruler, he was going to give up and crawl under that kid's feet? This was absolutely impossible. The heavens must have made a mistake. That ruler had ascended to the throne for 10 years, but the number of times he dealt with politics could be counted on one hand. He treated the officials badly and did all sorts of preposterous things. He even said in front of everyone that he wanted to destroy the Confucian faction. How could such a person be the Saint King? The Confucian faction had been passed down for more than 10,000 years and had created several generations of prosperous eras. It was the orthodox way of ruling a country. What right did Zhong Shou have to be recognized by the heavenly Tao? He, Zhu Zi, was knowledgeable and looked at the principles of the world. There was no way he was wrong. Even if Zhong Shou was really the saint ruler, then the heavens were the ones in the wrong. Not him, Zhu Zi. The billions of students in the Confucian faction had long been irreconcilable with Zhong Shou. Song Xingdao's fallacies and Shi Zi's theory that everyone was equal were simply a disaster. How could they be right? This world needed respect and etiquette, and there was a hierarchy in order for it to function properly and for there to be a great era of governance. What was the point of being like China? However, the most important thing now was to save Yin. Only when this ruler of Taishan was still there and the Taishan country was still stable could they have the ability to go up against Zhong Shou and Song Xingdao. The two of them spoke, totally ignoring Wushang Yuan Demon. The latter was furious and wanted to speak. In the end, he kept silent. He didn't say anything. Only his lips curled up and he laughed coldly. Taisher kept silent and looked into the world with a dark gaze. Who knew what he was thinking about? Xiaoguan was at the side and looked at the scenes like an outsider. However, He found it really interesting, and he was really interested. At this moment, several world rivers away, at a place close to God-falling plains, Qingming was stunned as she looked into the cloud world. She felt that her body and mind were all turning cold. This was a jade altar that stretched out in the void outside of the world. There were thousands of Taoist faction disciples on it. It was one of the nodes of the endless sky, forbidden magic formation. It provided a steady stream of Tao energy and spiritual energy for this formation that sealed off the void. It locked down hundreds of miles of land and also suppressed Zhongshuo's world-burning flame. Naturally, it couldn't be maintained by just 19 people who had to split their attention to deal with Song Xingdao and the Kenzo sect. However, at this moment, panic was spreading through the crowd. Everyone's eyes were filled with shock and astonishment. The purple Qilin flame spear cavalry was actually wiped out. How is that possible? Could it be that our three sects are going to be defeated here? A full 65,000 Xian Grey Dao soldiers are gone just like that? What should we do? Maintain the formation now? Is there any use? Who knows if this battle will affect this place? The Dao soldiers are defeated and the Blood Cloud cavalry is unrestrained. If we don't leave now, there will be many casualties. The Blood Cloud cavalry is really fierce and has a famous general leading them. Even 5 to 6 Saint Realm cultivators can't beat them. Everyone panicked, but Qingming didn't bother. Her heart felt like it was struck by lightning, and she was stunned. The king of Qilin accompanied him. That person was actually the Saint King. Chapter 1082. At the same time, within Gantian Mountain City, on the altar hanging alone on the high cliff, Kong Rui's brows rose up as he looked at a jade stone that was on the verge of breaking. More accurately, it was a formation plate made of jade. It was a secret technique from the Kong family that corresponded to another artifact. As long as the formation plate was in his hands and the corresponding artifact was still complete, then no one would be able to harm the person he was protecting. What a strong evil technique, Yin-Yang Heart Needle Curse. Is it Zhongshuan? Kong Rui muttered to himself. A complicated expression flashed across his eyes. The Yin-Yang Heart Needle incantation was an ancient technique that only the Grand Shang Grand Tutor knew. Kong Rui had never personally seen it, but he had heard the elders in the family talk about it. 100 years ago, before Emperor Yuanshan took over, Zhongshuan had used this technique to kill someone. Only then did Yin Yu succeed in taking the throne. At that time, even if the entire Kong family worked together, they couldn't block this technique. His great-uncle, who was once the imperial astronomer, spat out blood and died 3 years later. The reason was that his injuries were too heavy in that battle, and he was unable to suppress it. With Yin Yu taking over, the animosity between the Kong family and Zhongshuan naturally ended. Instead, they had to respect him and try to get on his good side. However, because of Kong Yao, his relationship with Zhongshuan was really bad. At this moment, Kong Rui couldn't help but feel emotional. This person was able to become the Taishang Grand Teacher and spread his name across the world because of this Yin-Yang Heart Needle Curse. Today's defeat was also because of this technique. You used the Taishang country power to cultivate and enter the Saint Realm. However, since you knew that the Taishang country fate was declining, you didn't stop and instead fell deeper into it. Why did you do that? That jade stone formation plate was about to break and couldn't be salvaged. Kong Rui sighed and didn't bother anymore. The two of them fought in the air, and he had already lost. He was actually unable to block for a moment. Although they were 10,000 miles apart, and Zhongshuan had borrowed the vital energy essence of 3,000 kids. However, the gap between the two couldn't be calculated logically. Luckily, it was okay. This technique couldn't do anything to his lord. Kong Rui turned to look at the sky, only to see a few bright stars shining in the sky. The stars in the sky were the manifestation of the laws and great Taos of this domain. Therefore, the starry skies of the various worlds were largely the same. However, there were some slight differences, reflecting the changes of the various realms. And these people who cultivated algebra relied on the changes of these celestial bodies to observe the changes in the general situation of a world. It was unknown who owned a few of them, but they were still in culmination. Since he didn't know anything about the light or the dark, he must be the rumored candidate for the divine emperor. A star near the east, surrounded by purple energy, was Zhongsho's life star. It had only appeared in the starry sky today. He looked exceptionally pure and holy, completely different from the other godly emperor candidates. The second star belonged to Kong Yao, who was also at the army-shattering, light-shaking realm. At this moment, starlight was also shining towards the east. If that's the case, then the outcome has already been decided. The arrival of a saint was like a sword unsheathed. His techniques were unable to hide Zhongsho anymore, and he also didn't need to purposely hide anything. The Daqian country strength was already formed, and their wings were fully grown. No one could wipe it out, and no one could suppress the light of the Saint King. Shaking his head, Kong Rui got up and walked out of the altar. However, at this moment, a weird glow flashed in his eyes. The dragon energy is flowing towards the west, and the Avicii throne can't suppress it. Why is that? A few years ago, Kong Rui still needed the one king divination money to observe the changes in the earth energy. At this moment, he didn't need any special techniques to be able to see everything. He stood on the spot in deep thought. And just like that, he gained something. In just a moment, he gained something. He gave out a self-mocking laugh. The changes just now made his heart jump. So that is the case, it is time to move the capital. Gantian Mountain was prosperous and could be compared to the imperial capital, but it was located in a corner and was a little small. In the future, it would be good to use it as a companion city. To be able to move the capital to the central continent, the results of this battle would be much better than he had imagined. Looking down from the mountain peak, he looked at the luxurious Kong family residence that was built less than 3 years ago. Kong Rui's face was filled with a bitter smile. It seemed like not long later, it was time to move. However, this time it was the central continent. How nostalgic. What are you afraid of? Although Kong Yao didn't know what technique it was, anyone with a tough fate would find it hard to be carved by it. For example, that Xiang King and Ranwu King. They have a strong, vengeful aura that demons and evil cannot invade. Husband is about the same. God Falling Plains battlefield. When Zhongsho heard Kong Yao's words, he heaved a sigh of relief. Speaking of which, Yuan Jing and Kong Rui did indeed say that he had the Saint King energy protecting his body and that no evil could invade his body. As for the Qilin auspicious beast in legends, it was able to chase away all evil. At this moment, apart from his body feeling cold and his chest hurting, he didn't feel anything else. Putting down his worries, Zhongsho looked into the distance once more. His spiritual sense spread out and locked onto Blood Saint Demon Lord, Yuntai, and Shuejiao. If it was as expected, the three of them should be thinking about how to escape today. Moments later, Zhongsho laughed coldly. As expected, however, the three of them were already here. So how could they leave just because they wanted to? He actually stood up, his body flashing as he walked out of the carriage. There wasn't much time left, and the battle was coming to an end. Then it was time for him to act. In front of Yinyu's carriage, Yuntai felt a chill down his spine. He could already feel that bone-piercing, killing intent. Looking into the distance, coincidentally, Zhongsho's true body had disappeared from the jade carriage. Only an illusion was left on the throne. He could only sense that this person was holding a sword as he sped through the air and walked over. His speed didn't seem fast or slow, but in just a 30th of a breath, he crossed dozens of miles. One of the divine consciousnesses had locked onto his cloud platform. He had to work together with Shuejiao to block, using their spiritual sense to block and lock down to prevent this person from getting close. Unfortunately, the people on the carriage didn't notice anything. They were still surprised by the arrival of the 3 sets of Great Beidou true martial sword formations. Just one set of sword formations can temporarily restrict the Blood Cloud cavalry. At that time, our left wing will be able to crush them in a few moments. It doesn't need so long. There's still 100 breaths before Grand Teacher Zhongshuan's yin-yang heart needle can be activated. Oh, are those people the Qian's heaven-grade Dao soldiers? Heaven-grade Dao soldiers? Just a barbaric country. What kind of heaven-grade Dao soldiers can compare to the Taoist faction's true martial swordsmen? Only 72, half of the true martial swordsmen. Even if their combat strength is similar, there is no need to worry. The officials were in deep discussion. Even Yin Yu's expression turned for the better. Shui Jiu bowed. The situation is dangerous, with the Taoist faction's great true martial sword formation covering. Your Majesty, please leave this place. Yintai nodded. Our Taishang has already lost this battle. We don't have much time, and it will be too late. Your Majesty, please follow us to leave this god-falling plains. Yin was startled. His mind was totally blank. 3 great beta true martial sword formations entered, and the yin-yang heart needle technique was about to be completed. The battle situation welcomed a turning point, and they might even be able to achieve a huge victory. Why did the two of them ask him to leave at the same time? Did they not have high hopes for this battle? At this moment, Yin forced himself to calm down, trying his best not to let his voice tremble. Yuntai, Celestial Venerable, Saint Master Lu, can the two of you tell me why? Your Majesty will know the reason in the future. Yuntai sighed. These 100 great, true martial swordsmen entered the battlefield just to cover him and Yin and not to try to turn the situation around. If he said the truth now, who knows whether or not this Taishang Yuanshan Emperor would lose his mind from the shock. Shui Jiu's face wouldn't look good either. Yin didn't understand and wanted to ask more. However, he heard a loud explosion not far away, and exclamations rose up all around. Looking out, only to see that it was the left wing that he had high hopes for. Those 40,000 Heaven Demon War Cavalry and 10,000 Yuanshi Demon Spirit Cavalry all turned around, swiftly galloping backward like they were fleeing for their lives. They tossed the 100,000 Taishang Cavalry to the side. They allowed the common people's mysterious dragon warriors and Kinzo sect Moyang Sword Cavalry to charge over to crush them. The cavalry on the left and right collapsed right away, unable to block the Taishang Cavalry for even a moment. Everyone's faces were filled with shock and confusion. They didn't understand why the demon sect people wanted to flee. Did they collude with the Qian? They purposely acted out such a show to cause the Taishang to lose and all their elites to die here. However, in terms of hatred, the demon sect was above the Taoist faction and Confucian faction. Xingxia was suppressed and sealed and had no chance of reviving. It was said that Taisher Demon Lord was injured because of Zhongshou. Recently, the demon sect people went all out, crazily massacring the Qian people and even assassinating officials. Logically speaking, the hatred between the two sides should be unresolvable. However, it was tough to say. The thoughts of the demon sect people were tough for normal people to predict. So our Taishang has lost. As expected, these demon path people are unreliable. Damn it. Miley family took out 20,000 great swordsmen Xuanyu. Retreat. If not, we will all die here. Can we retreat? Those Moyang Sword Cavalry are already blocking the back path of the middle army. We are dead this time. We are dead. Is that yin-yang heart needle technique not done yet? Zhong Yuan's 30,000 blood cavalry had already broken in from the waist of the Taishang middle army. They were still invincible. The Kinzo sect's Moyang Sword Cavalry went diagonally behind, cutting off the retreat path of the hundreds of thousands of infantry. The 50,000 common people's Xian Dragon Warriors followed closely behind the tens of thousands of demon cavalry. They chased and killed. The defeat of the two wings also affected the middle army. At this moment, it was like a mountain collapsing. On the side of the Taishang, it was like the sky was about to collapse. The opposite Deqian army was pumped up. Everyone's faces were filled with disbelief. They actually won today, just like that? How difficult. They originally thought that it would be a tough battle, but they won so easily without even using any strength. Yuntai took it all in and sighed. When he spoke once more, he didn't allow Yin to reject. Your Majesty, please allow me to be rude. Chapter 1083. Yunai took it all in and sighed. When he spoke once more, he didn't allow Yin to reject. Your Majesty, please allow me to be rude. A cloud light swept, and before Yin could react, his body was swept up from the throne. Everyone here could die, but only Yin couldn't die here. The moment his body flew into the air, he saw two streaks of sword light slashing towards him. Slaying. It was the two-source ocean Big Dipper demon slaying sword formations above the Juchi Palace. Each streak of light had the strength of a Saint Realm expert. The sword energy was extremely cold. Yuntai's pupils constricted. At this moment, dozens of sword energies shot out from the three great Beidou, true martial sword formations, intersecting with one another. The two streaks of sword energy were broken down halfway. Then, three thick and huge true martial giant swords formed in midair and slashed down towards the Juchi Palace. However, at this moment, Yuntai didn't care about the outcome of the battle between these two top Dao soldiers. He only focused on explaining to Yin, who was wrapped up in cloud energy, these source ocean demon-slaying warriors are the strongest Dao soldiers under Zhongshu. When he was exploring the outer region, he fought against the heaven-grade Dao soldiers of Judu Xianting. 1 against 3, and he was able to win. Who knows where this Zhongshu found such a Dao soldier cultivation technique? Their combat strength is similar to our Taoist faction true martial swordsmen, and they are even sharper. When Yin heard this, he stopped struggling. He could use King Path martial arts, and his combat strength wasn't below Saint Realm. If he didn't want to leave, even Yuntai and Shui Zhai wouldn't be able to force him. At this point, only the strength of the Taoist faction and demon faction Dao soldiers could be relied on. However, if these 72 so-called Source Ocean demon-slaying warriors had the ability to restrict the Great Beidou true martial sword formation, then this battle would be unsalvageable. However, he still had some doubts in his heart. Even if he couldn't win, there was still Zhongshuan and the Yin-Yang Heart Needle Curse. 70 minutes had passed, and only 20 breaths were left. That Zhongshu has an invulnerable body. Curses are hard to hurt. Zhongxian's Yin-Yang Heart Needle technique might be useful against normal monarchs, but it couldn't do anything to him. You're just asking for your own humiliation and seeking death. Yin was stunned again. He remembered that not long ago, when Zhongshuan used this spell, Taoist Master Yuntai did not say that. Although he did not agree, he did not deny it either. Even if Zhongshu had a special physique and could not do anything to him, it was needless to say that he was courting death. He looked at Scholar Shuai Lai, only to see that this Confucian faction disciple's eyes flashed, and he didn't dare to look directly at him. He only nodded slightly. Indeed, we can't hurt him. The profound multiplication spell has been activated and cannot be interrupted. We can't save him. Yin couldn't help but frown. Could it be that the two of them knew something? What exactly was it that made the two of them choose to flee without any hesitation? Was this related to the demon sect's tens of thousands of armored cavalry fleeing without fighting? That brat has won a great victory in this battle. At this moment, his aura is at its peak, and his king energy is increasing. We can't fight him head-on. We need to avoid him. Just as he said this, he saw a ghost-like sword light unbelievably break open the void and pierce through it. Where the sword tip was pointed at was where Yu's throat was. Yuntai instantly reacted and struck back with his whip. However, he struck the air and hit the air. Looking closely, he noticed that the sword shadow was all illusionary. Instead, it was another sword light that followed the path of the sword and sped over. But this time, their target was the cloud platform. Slaying. An extremely sharp killing intent caused Yuntai's heart to turn cold. Instantly, he gathered his 5 energies to form a shield in front of him. This kid's sword technique is amazing. Please help me. There was no reaction from the side. Yuntai took a peek. Only then did he notice that Scholar Shuai was hurriedly dodging something, bringing with him a bunch of illusionary images. However, in front of him, there was clearly nothing. Illusionary technique. Only then did Yuntai notice that there was a green mirror hanging high in the distance. Balls of green light shone down towards him. Just looking at it caused illusions to form. Sky Fox and Treasure, illusionary heart mirror. Yuntai roared like a tiger and punched out. The five-colored chi gathered and formed the shape of a dragon on his fist. The moment the energy shield in front of him was pierced, his fist smashed onto the tip of the sword. With a loud pung, a vast and majestic strength smashed in from the tip of the sword. It was obvious that it was compressed to the extreme, causing his flesh and blood to collapse. The power of the slaying sword within it directly attacked his internal organs and destroyed his life force. Yuntai's face twitched. At the last moment before his body collapsed, he tossed out a three-finger-sized wooden man, following which his body disappeared from the spot and appeared 100 feet away. As for the wooden puppet substitute, it instantly turned into powder and scattered. Looking out at the scenes in the distance, Yuntai's heart was about to bleed. The substitute technique was simple, but the more profound it was, the more it tested one's attainments in the path. It also needed to consume all sorts of treasures that people couldn't imagine. Every item that could be used as a substitute was priceless. It could be used to purchase a perfectly developed minor dimension. Today, he had used these two treasures. However, at least he managed to escape death once. The moment such a thought rose up, a sense of danger rose up in his heart. His mind instinctively flashed with the petite body that he had neglected before. Chu Shui, Blood Moon Blade. Heaven hiding ability. A blood-colored blade light suddenly exploded out behind him. It was really sudden, as quick as lightning, flashing across in an instant. Even if Yuntai tried his best to dodge, he wasn't able to. His body was sliced in half, his vital energy dissipating. Yuntai's face was filled with pain and anxiousness. He knew that at this moment, he was forced into a corner. You want to leave? That won't be easy. However, I still have some debts that I want to settle with all of you. Zhongsho laughed coldly as his body sped through the air. After forcing Yuntai away, where he stabbed out for the second time, his eyes turned to Inu. Out of the four Saint Realm experts here, the one he hated the most was the Blood Saint Demon Lord. However, this person had Ao Kuan blocking him and wouldn't be able to leave in a short time. On the contrary, this Inu was more important. He originally thought that this Emperor Yuanshan would only send a general over to sneak attack his Juchi palace. Who knew that this person would be so confident to personally come over? What a surprise. Today, if he killed this Taishang Emperor, then the Qian people would be able to unify the Cloud World. To attack a central cloud continent that had no leader and was in a state of disunity, it didn't take much effort for him. This sword wasn't for his own ambition, but for the people of the Cloud World to suffer less from the chaos of war. Even when the spiritual wave rose, he was confident that the people of the Cloud World would be able to pass peacefully. He could suppress the various sects and factions and prevent them from fighting. Actually, even if he unified the Cloud World, Zhongsho would be too lazy to bother. He would just use strength to make the various sects and aristocratic families listen to him. He remembered that at the end of the spiritual wave, less than 10% of the people of the Cloud World were left. Even the most prosperous Jiangnan was covered in desolate bones. If this Inu died, then everything would end. Inu's eyes opened wide, like a tiger opening its eyes, showing a fierce glow. Dragon Emperor 9 Royals. He struck out with a palm, and instantly a giant mountain and river image appeared behind Inu. Royals, spirits, royals, 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 royals of mountains and rivers. This was the Dragon Emperor 9 Royals. He grabbed out with a palm, instantly gathering King Path power. He actually wanted to grab the sword with his bare hands. Zhongsho's expression didn't change. The sword light still pressed forward. As the ruler of the Central Dynasty, How could Inyu's strength be underestimated? Top King Path Martial Arts. Unfortunately, you can't use any of them. Sooner or later, the mountains and rivers will break and the country will belong to others. The sword light broke in, turning into millions of streaks. It suddenly retracted and turned into one sword. Inyu's body explosively retreated. His face was dim, and a trace of blood appeared on his right hand. As for the Central Plains mountain and river picture behind him, it was showing signs of shattering. Zhongsho's expression was cold as he followed closely behind. The third sword was like the horns of an antelope as he struck out once more. This Yuanshan emperor, although he controlled 52 states, his martial path was really average and wasn't that outstanding. He was out of the country and also suffered a huge defeat. At this moment, he was at his weakest state. If he broke the Dragon Emperor Nine Royals technique, then he could kill him with one sword. Lu Li's eyes were filled with panic and anxiousness. He finally broke free from Zhongsho's illusionary technique. With a wave of his sleeves, several tens of scrolls of the moral emblems flew out one after another, turning into a light belt out of thin air surrounding Inyu. He did not choose his words carefully and shouted, "How dare you? You tyrant! You really dare to hurt the ruler of the Mid-Plains? Aren't you afraid of the punishment of the heavens and the backlash of luck?" When Zhongsho heard this, he only felt that it was preposterous, and he couldn't help but burst out laughing. "This time, you all said that you want to help the heavens enforce justice, punish the people for their crimes, to kill me, this tyrannical ruler. Since that is the case, then you won't allow me to fight back? That's right, in your eyes, Zhongsho, deserve to die. You all want to slice me into pieces. As for this Yuanshan emperor, it is best if he lives 1,000 years, right?" The sword stabbed out, showing no mercy. It was blocked by the light and wasn't able to stab in. However, those dozens of scrolls turned into flames in the air and burned into dust. Zhongsho continued, and was prepared for the fourth sword to end Inyu's life, just as he heard a thunderous roar in his ear. "Tyrannical ruler, you dare to hurt my master? Inyang Heart Needle, prepare to die." Zhongsho was stunned and looked below. Then, a large altar came into his view. At the center of the altar was Zhongshuan. In the surroundings, there were thousands of children. Curses and restrictions? Zhongsho instinctively thought back to what Kong Yao said before, that this technique was extremely evil. Then what about these kids? Only then did thoughts of stopping rise up in his heart. The heads of the 3,000 boys and girls all exploded. Then, a huge external power charged into his heart. The red jade necklace that was covered in cracks instantly shattered. Numerous yin and cold energy wrapped around him. Xiaori roared out from behind. He charged out from the carriage. His body swelled up by 10 times. A white jade horn and purple Qilin golden armor appeared on his body as he flew to the side of Zhongsho. He was furious. It was obvious that he was extremely violent. That you're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.